Just before we go into questions, I just want you maybe to clarify something for the committee from last week's hearing before we move on. At last week's hearing, Mr. Sheehan, Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer, was here from the department, and there was questions asked both by Deputy Murphy and myself regarding potential historical incidents at the Straffan plant, the one that appeared in the primetime investigation programme. And Deputy Murphy had asked, and I asked, and I quote, I said, in view of the fact that there were historical incidents that may have had a bearing on some of this, was the department not on high alert? What was the department doing and what measures was it putting in place? And Mr. Sheehan said, I will try and answer, and you would ask this and you had a bit of difficulty trying to get an answer for it. I will try and answer as briefly as I can. If you were to ask me even 3 weeks ago, what were standards like within the slaughter plant in Straffan, I would say the standards were very good within the slaughter plant in Straffan, unquote. And this week, in answer to a parliamentary question to Deputy Rada Cronin, a paragraph in that reads, and I'll quote directly, it says, in advance of any events highlighted in the recent television programme, investigations led by my department involving officials connected to the business mentioned and another Garda-led investigation into the individuals have both progressed to such that prosecution cases will shortly be heard before the courts. It would not be appropriate to comment any further on these matters, and of course it wouldn't be, and I wouldn't expect them to. But what I'm trying to reconcile is that the impression was given, unless I missed something here last week, that the department, I mean, I'm quoting directly from what Mr. Sheehan said to the meeting, and the impression was given that the department wasn't aware of any serious matters like this. And can you just clarify this court case, and I want you to be careful, I know you will be what you want to say. This court case, it's about animal welfare, is it, at the plant?
Well, it's about two things. It's about animal welfare, and traceability. Yeah.
And
traceability.
Traceability.
Yeah.
Okay, the two issues highlighted.
Yes.
And how did we get an answer like that from the Assistant Chief Veterinary Officer? Could Mr. Blake comment on that? Or Mr. Callanan?
Well,
as the Chief Vet or Chief Inspector?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm happy to deal with it, and if Mr. Blake feels he needs to supplement what I say, I'm happy for him to do that. So, I mean, first of all, we were all horrified by what we saw in that programme. Anybody who saw it was horrified.
That as a given.
Okay.
I don't want to meet with that.
But it's important to understand what was seen in the programme, okay? So what we saw, I think, were events where, and again, I have to be careful, events on a farm adjacent to the slaughter premises. And we saw in a small portion of the footage what was happening in the slaughterhouse. And in the context of what's happening in the slaughterhouse, we staff the slaughterhouse on the day of slaughter, 1 day a week. And we check for traceability, and we check for the welfare of the animals as they come in. And we check for hygiene, and we check all of the conditions that apply to any slaughter plant. And I'm certain that what Mr. Sheehan meant was that in the context of what was going on in the slaughter plant, under our supervision, we were satisfied that things seemed reasonably okay in the context of all those parameters.
Well, can you use the word reasonable for a minute back to you? Would it not have been reasonable, and there'd be an expectation that he could have said that there is, you know, I want to be careful what I say to the committee, but there is an ongoing Garda-led investigation into the individuals, and that there is a court prosecution case due to be heard before the courts.
Yeah, well, listen, first of all, I'm not certain Mr. Sheehan knew that. He may or may not. You're asking me to comment on something somebody else said, so it's difficult.
Hold on for a second. The horse racing sector was in before the committee, right? And Mr. Sheehan was coming in as the representative of the department. Are you seriously trying to tell me that in the briefing before he would come in here, and as the Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer, that he wouldn't be aware of that there was a court case ongoing regarding this plant?
I'm not trying to tell you that.
What are you trying to tell me?
I'm trying to tell you that I'm not sure what was. I mean, you're asking me to comment on something somebody else said, but insofar as the supervision of the slaughter plant was concerned, things seemed to be okay. There was an ongoing prosecution which had not concluded. So I don't know how we could have drawn conclusions about the slaughter
I
plant.
wanted them to draw conclusions of an ongoing court case. But what I would have wanted to know, I think the committee would have liked to know, and Deputy Murphy as well, who was trying to get these questions answered, was that there was an ongoing investigation, because we questioned specifically, as did a number of the deputies here, in relation to historical cases regarding the individuals involved and the plant. And this was not mentioned. And what I'm saying to you is, here it is now in black and white in reply to a parliamentary question since, where it sets out clearly that there is a Garda-led investigation into the individuals, and that there is also a prosecution case progressed. Both have been progressed, such that the prosecution cases will shortly be heard before the courts.
Yeah. Well, look, that should have been mentioned. What I can absolutely assure you, Deputy, is there's no effort by the department to not be clear about these things.
Okay.
We're happy to give a full report to the committee on everything that's happened, subject to the avoidance of prejudicing the prosecution. I'm very happy to do that.
That fact was highly relevant to answers we tried to get to questions here all morning, here last Thursday morning. That's all, or to a lot of the questions that were asked here by deputies. That's all. So look, we'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah.
The first deputy is Deputy Mark Cossack. 15 minutes, Deputy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'll stay with that issue just from the off. The person who was operating that abattoir, was there prior convictions?
Yeah, there was. Again, I just really want to be careful, and it's not a defensive point, but I want to be absolutely...
We're not referring to a live... No,
I understand that. So there was a conviction in 2012, I believe.
On? Conviction was for animal cruelty, was it?
Was for animal cruelty. Not at that plant, but somewhere else.
Well,
I'm simply...
I don't think it's the building that... No,
but I'm just making the point, in 2012. And there were 2 prosecutions since then, both of which were dismissed. There was the ongoing prosecution that the chairman referred to there, and obviously there's a new investigation now.
But a prior conviction wasn't enough for the deputy veterinary officer to have alarm bells ring. Would that not invite an extra level of oversight when that is already expected?
Okay. Well, so look, there is nothing about this that doesn't require us to do a root and branch review of everything we do. I think
the department has subsequently taken the horses and moved them to different lands. Is that correct?
No, they have been moved.
They have been moved?
Yes.
And the lands are under the ownership of the person who owns the abattoir?
Well, we know where they are. They have been moved. That premises was subject to a control notice, and all of that will be part of the ongoing investigation.
Are the lands owned, where the horses now are those lands owned by the person who operates?
I believe so, but I don't know who owns the land.
Okay, this does not, when you look at the level of cruelty that was inflicted on those animals, the idea that those animals are still in the care of the person involved, that doesn't sit well with me.
But can I just make a point? And I absolutely accept what you say, Deputy. But we're in a position now where we're engaged in an investigation. And we have to take it step by step, and we have to do everything correctly. And these things are not simple. So I would simply say that in the context of the movement of those animals and what's happening now, step by step. So there might be demands for us to do things now that might prejudice our overall objective here.
Just going back to the statement of the Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer last week, can I ask, because you said that you're happy to furnish the committee with a report on a deep dive on all of this, and internal department correspondence is going to come under the spotlight in this. It'll be gone through with a fine-tooth comb. Had there been any issues raised by members of the department beforehand?
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, there's 2 distinct issues. There are probably 3 issues here. One is the welfare issue. So there had been 5 complaints, welfare complaints, about the lands, I think, in the curtilage of the slaughter plant. And we had investigated those complaints. We went out and we examined the horses. A veterinary officer examined the horses.
Sorry, when you say 5 complaints, were those complaints raised within the department or maybe
from members of the public? From members of the public. So we went out, we checked, and I've seen the welfare reports from those. So there are welfare reports on those. And nothing was found that was of a nature that would require the seizure of the horse at those times. okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is, I mean, I've reflected on the process for approving the plant, okay, because there are obvious legitimate questions about the history of the owners of the plant, I think. And I've examined the file, I've had to look through it, and it does seem to me that the application at the time, the focus of the examination, was on the suitability of the premises from a slaughter point of view. You know, hygiene issues, physical infrastructure, and the various systems, quality control systems required.
We've been through that to an extent. So
yeah, so
I
I suppose the point I'm coming to is that it wasn't evident to me, looking at the file, that the suitability of the person, an individual, was part of the formal process of approval. Okay.
But I just want to, and I don't intend to labour this point because of many other things that I want to get to, but the Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer made that statement before PAC relatively recently, but you're telling me there had been 5 separate complaints made by members of the public, presumably before that. And then, and are you telling me unequivocally that there was no issues raised internally within the department?
Well, I'm telling you that I'm not aware of any issues raised internally in the department, and I've looked at the approval file, I've looked at the welfare notices prepared on the basis of those complaints. And look, Deputy, I mean, I start from the point where there's nothing about this that doesn't require review, and we have asked Professor Paddy Wall to come in and do a root and branch review of the system of identification and traceability and the system for the approval of plants.
I want to explore that issue of traceability a little further. There's been a huge fallout from this RT Investigates programme. You know, we've had Europol has joined a European meeting coordinating international elements of an investigation. We have Dutch authorities issuing a serious warning through the European Commission's Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed system. There's been huge implications right across Europe and huge reputational damage to the Irish food system and you know what we work so hard to achieve in terms of standards and traceability. Do you accept the RT Investigates figure of 20,000 horses disappearing from the system each year?
I don't know whether that's correct or not, Deputy, so I neither accept nor reject it. I don't know. But, I mean, what I can say is that the traceability system in Ireland was compliant with European Union rules, and that there are clearly trans-European issues here in the context of the traceability system. And some of the events shown in the programme took place in other member states. So it's clear that despite having a system that complies with EU rules, if people are determined to circumvent it, they can. And it therefore does need that root and branch review.
Mr. Gleeson, you have to give me some sort of insight on that number. I mean, there was an allegation made in that programme that 20,000 horses are going missing. As the Secretary-General of the Department of Agriculture, you have to be able to advise me whether that is ballpark, whether you utterly refute it, whether you think it's close, nearby or ridiculous. Yeah.
Well, I can't do that today, Deputy. I could say something now, it would be speculative, and it wouldn't be right for me to do that. But I can certainly try and come back to the committee on that.
I just don't think that's good enough. I'll have to be honest. I want to move to, there's 2 other issues that have only arisen during the last week. Chief Financial Officer Donal O'Shea of the IHRB. News reached us that last Friday he has resigned. He's been on voluntary leave for the last year. As you know, you'll remember Darragh O'Loughlin having to come before PAC and unleash that bombshell on us last year. Was the department appraised beforehand of the resignation? How did you come to find out about the resignation?
Well, the first I personally knew was when I saw it in the newspaper. That's the first I
knew through the press.
Sorry?
You found out through the press, like
personally. That's the first. Yeah, that's the first I knew. Yeah.
Would you have expected the CEO to have spoken to you? Would you have expected Darragh O'Loughlin to pick up the phone? Well, and say, or to either to you or to the minister, and say, by the way, I've gotten a letter a resignation letter?
Well, he may have told HRI. It may have happened. It may have been out in the press as soon as it came. I don't know. But as far as I can see, Darragh O'Loughlin has been absolutely transparent about this from the beginning. He came in here last year and
He did?
He found out about events immediately before the meeting and disclosed them.
I remember.
So I feel he's been pretty transparent about the whole episode.
When you get a letter of resignation, you have two choices: to either accept it or to not accept it. Clearly, if you weren't apprised of the letter of resignation, then the Minister was never involved in any discussion as to whether we would accept the resignation when tendered.
Well, the Minister doesn't appoint employees in the IHRB. He doesn't appoint board members. So those are matters for the board and the chief executive of the IHRB.
Have you been
I'm not
apprised?
sure what refusing to accept a resignation means in practice.
Because now the CFO of the IHRB is unlikely to appear before this committee to account for the actions that were taken around that transfer of monies from the Injured Jockey Fund. It's highly unlikely that we will ever get this person before the Public Accounts Committee to account for the use of public monies. That's why I think it should be part of the discussion. Even if it was decided, yes, of course, we're in such a position, we have to accept a resignation when it arrives. But certainly, it should have been discussed, because that accountability to the public purse is now in all likelihood lost. He was on voluntary leave over the last year. Do you know, was he on voluntary leave on pay?
I understand that Darragh O'Loughlin said that he was, I think.
Do you have any details on the terms surrounding the resignation? Was it a straight resignation or was there a compensatory?
No, I don't. But a resignation implies to me that somebody has resigned, and resignation, I would imagine, is a matter that's determined. The conditions are determined in the contract of employment, which is with the IHRB.
Okay, I've many other places that I want to go to. I did want to talk about the external review of the Horse and Greyhound Fund, but I may return to it. Mr. Gleeson, you didn't choose to address in your opening statement Chapter 10 of the CNAG's Accounts of Public Services, and it was one of the things listed for discussion today. Why did you make the decision not to address this in your opening statement?
Well, I assumed we'd discuss it in the context of the meeting, and I addressed the appropriation account, but my natural assumption was the CNAG would make his usual introduction, deal with those issues, and we'd discuss them in the meeting.
Okay. You lost.
I had 5 minutes for an opening statement.
I understand, but it was listed for discussion, and I have to tell you, when I read this chapter, my jaw dropped. You lost the forest.
Well, I'm happy to address if you have questions, I'm happy to address them.
Yeah, look, the question is around oversight and how we do the registries. We lost the forest, but we gained a Georgian house. And then we found out there was somebody living in a Georgian house. We also gained, we didn't gain a cottage. So on Back Weston Farm is where we decided that we found the Georgian house. And then, so we didn't know the house was there, but then we found out that the farm foreman resides on the farm, but there's no tenancy agreement in place.
Yeah.
We find out about Stackhamy Cottage, that this has led to a member of staff for €104 a year, which is fairly good rental, I would think, in this market. And this was only on 38% of the lands, if I'm right. This investigation was done. Have you subsequently reviewed the other 62% of the property holdings?
Well, so there are 3 categories of land here. There's land that the department uses. There's forestry where we transferred all the forestry to Quilcha in 1989, but there were elements of it clearly where there were difficult issues of ownership or legal issues, and that wasn't transferred. The third is this land commission legacy land. And I think our policy was essentially to value lands if they were being disposed of, because there was quite a lot of small plots of bog with turbary rights and other complexities. So we've moved now to value the lands we have. We've started with Back Weston. I think it's been valued this week. We're working with Tailteann Éireann to value the farm in Raphoe. We're working with Tailteann Éireann to come up with a basis for the valuation of those other lands, which will involve some kind of a desktop review. We're working to transfer the remaining lands to Quilcha, the remaining forestry lands, but some of that is complicated stuff. And our objective is to transfer those bog lands to the MPWS, But again, there are complicated issues because these are essentially legacy plots that we have for decades and decades that we weren't using ourselves. So these are difficult enough issues to resolve. We've resolved the duplication of registration with OPW. In relation to the houses on those farms, 2 of those farms, and these are kind of, again, legacy issues, 2 of those houses were resided in by farm managers. So we run farms. We have farm managers that live in the houses. And those are contracts related to their contract of employment. They're required to live on the farm.
I don't think the details of the tenancies were covered within the contracts of employment, were they?
I believe they were, but I'll come back to you on that. But my understanding is that these were conditions of their employment.
I wanted to just put a question to Ms. Ivory just on because from a deeper point of view, the valuation and allowing a nil valuation to sit on the balance sheet. Are you happy with that as an official for the Department of Public Expenditure? Are you happy that these nil values are recorded?
Firstly, thank you, Deputy, for the question. So adherence to the public financial procedures is a matter for the department, as outlined in the public financial procedures.
I didn't ask whether it's a matter. I understand it's a matter for the department, but I'm asking for your department's view on the current situation.
I understand that the accounting officer has agreed with the recommendations of the report and set out to address these through working both internally and also been engaging with government accounting within our department in order to address that issue. And thus going forward, in future, this will be addressed. So we're happy with the actions taken following, this recommendation being given.
I have many more questions on many more subjects, but my time is elapsed.
Okay, you'll come back and present.
Could I just make one really quick point? Deputy, we accept all of the CNAG's findings and we're implementing them. So I just want to make that point clear.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. What's really infuriating is when you have a witness in front of you and then you discover that we haven't had what we feel is, a fair response back. And in this case, we can, it's fortunate that you're in a couple of weeks later. We had Horse Racing Ireland and the IRHB in a couple of weeks ago, and obviously that was the context that the department official was here. But, it's infuriating then to, have to go back on the same questions. You talked about the prosecution, the 2012 prosecution, and you said that there were 2 other prosecutions that were dismissed. Full stop. But that's not the full story. There was the reason they were dismissed was the absence of key witnesses and key witnesses not being notified of the court date. So they weren't there to give the evidence, and that's why the dismissal happened. That must have been infuriating for the people who had done the work, to get to the point where a prosecution is taken. So there was, and I don't know if those gaps in terms of future prosecutions have been closed, that won't happen again. But I know what it takes to get something to, and the kind of evidence that will have to be assembled. So the department would have been well aware of the nature of those complaints. Even if they weren't successful prosecutions, you would have had information. And even with that knowledge, the license was still renewed. I mean, does that not? I mean, who's involved in the awarding of the licence? Is there any animal welfare input into the awarding of the licence? It's surely not just about the premises.
Yeah, well, first of all, it should have raised alarm bells, and I've already said a number of times that this requires a real branch of review of our processes. So, for the just to be clear about this, because I don't want to leave here with anybody misled about anything. I want to be as clear as I can. So there was a successful prosecution in 2011. There was a prosecution in 2012. In the 2011 one, the charges were dismissed on the basis that you said that our witness was advised that she wasn't needed. The 2012 conviction prosecution was successful. There was a prosecution in 2016, and there was a departmental witness, and the case was dismissed, notwithstanding the fact that the witnesses turned up. And then there's a case preceding the prime time one, which the chairman referred to here. So I suppose what I'm saying is that as I looked at the file, it seemed to me that it was very much focused on the physical infrastructure and the suitability of the premises, okay? And to be fair to the people involved in this, I'm not sure they had guidance on how to interpret the provisions relating to fit and proper person. So I'm accepting that the department should have provided that guidance.
Fit and proper person, surely, in the case of, where animal welfare is key. It doesn't matter if the walls of this slaughterhouse were paved with gold. It's how the process is conducted. Animal welfare has to be a central piece of that. You were talking about people who are vets, who have an interest in animal welfare. How would you not interpret that is a requirement? And
so, I mean, what I'm saying is, I think, from the department's point of view, that there should have been some guidance on this point. There should have been some guidance. It should have been part of the process. If it was part of the process, there are complexities. So you'd have to consider, how do you manage a corporate applicant? If an employee has a conviction or prosecution against them, if the MD has, the answers might be different. How do you manage a prosecution that was dismissed? Is that something that you could take into account? How do you manage a prosecution, a successful conviction that was a number of years ago? Is there some time limit on the... So I'm not providing answers to these questions. I'm just saying that we should have had guidelines in place for these people. Those things should have been considered. Yeah. And we should have had some legal advice for people to determine how they manage these things. Right. We're doing those things now.
Okay, after the event, can I ask you in relation to an age requirement for an animal welfare officer? Is there one?
No.
And if you were to go to court with someone who was under 18, who was the animal welfare officer, how would the court, for example, would somebody be asked their age and whether or not they had a legal standing because of their age?
I don't know the answer to that question. All I can say is that there was no legal impediment to somebody under 18 being an animal welfare officer, and I have no idea what the age of the individual in this case was.
Could it have been the case that they were under 18?
I don't know, perhaps. But legally it could have. Legally it could have, yeah.
Because it goes, I mean, this is supposed to be a position of high responsibility. It's supposed to be somebody that is trained, accredited, all of that. With that accreditation process, does that require, what does that require?
It requires people to do a training course, and I'm not sure the details. Maybe Martin, maybe you know a little bit more about that.
Can you provide us with the detail?
Yeah.
in relation to that?
Happy to do that, yeah.
In relation to the licence for Shannonside, was there any amendment to the area that was covered from one licence to the next? Did it, for example, include the lairage, not include the lairage?
Yeah. Well, it's an approval. So the operators who had that premises before Shannonside had a larger area that included that piece that was shown on prime time. But the Shannonside application did not include that.
Okay, that answers the question. Again, I put questions on the last occasion in relation to the identification of, horse passports. Mm. And, my impression from the response, I don't have the transcript with me, but my impression from the response was, it was the person replying to me from your department gave the impression that, well, certainly the impression that I got was that couldn't understand how this could have happened, that there weren't concerns. Yet, we know that there was issues with passports going back to 2013, We know that there's another facility where there was, my understanding is that passports were bought on Amazon, that the department would have been aware of. So the department was aware that there were issues with passports. Now, it wasn't just one set of things that I felt that I didn't get a full and proper reply to. It was other things, including the identification of horses. We now know that this particular facility or a particular individual had passports with no corresponding horses. Like, can you address that?
Well, no. So we're starting to stray into areas now that might be pertinent to an investigation.
But can you address?
So
well, I don't want to go into the area that.
No, I understand that.
But was the department aware there were problems when they were here in front of us? How could you not be when you know?
Well, I think there are issues with identification of animals, all species, from time to time, which are generally resolved. And there was a case ongoing in relation to identification was part of that case, an investigation which hadn't reached its final conclusion. So the department was aware that there may have been problems with the identification. Well, we had no reason to believe, I think, that the animals coming through that plant were not properly identified, and we were checking the identification insofar as it was there. And can I just say, and this isn't in any way to imply that the system doesn't have to be examined, but this was a system that was consistent with European Union law. So the fact is we have a much better identification system for bovines. And that was developed over many years, and through many stresses in the mid and early 90s, we developed a system. That system is not necessarily appropriate for horses because it's a different business. But we are examining this now in conjunction with our European partners.
Can I just say, like the horse meat scandal was one that should have, you know, that should have made sure that it was as robust. And given that there are some horses that are obviously who have been raced and are not suitable for the food chain, there's actually a double need in relation to this to make sure that you can have full traceability. And you know, there's big industries here to be protected, including the racing industry, including the food industry. We know that is a high risk. Can I ask you about the 5 complaints? Because I talked to some of the people who made complaints, and like one particular individual I talked to made multiple complaints. Like, are we talking about 5 individuals making complaints, or are we talking about 5 cases in total?
I think it's my understanding is it's 5 cases, 5 complaints. I looked at the reports from those. A vet went out and examined the animals on those occasions. And the vet was satisfied that while there might have been some, for example, you might get a lame animal that isn't necessarily indicative of neglect, but something might have to be done, there might have to be veterinary attention paid to them, but that there was nothing of a nature that would require a prosecution or the seizure of animals on those occasions.
I mean, obviously this is in my constituency, so I'm talking to people who live nearby, and you know, I'm hearing something very different to what a professional is going out and looking at.
Yeah, well, I can only tell you what I'm aware of.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just in relation to, I'm going to skip into something else, and I'll come back to this because I have a number of questions, but I just want to, the CNAG's opening statement, the centralised management system, is that actually in place now?
Yes.
In place?
Yes.
Were there any further, since the 2022 accounts, were there any further pieces of land or buildings identified?
Not that I'm aware of.
Chair, do you want to? I also want to ask you in relation to your staff complement. Are you fully staffed? Are you vacancies, and particularly in the area of vets?
Well, we have just under 4,100 staff. The staffing complement has increased by 20% since I took this job in 2018. Are we fully staffed? Well, you could always do with more staff.
I mean, I'm not talking about, you could always do it more staff. Are there vacancies? Are you up to the number that you have, that you're funded for?
The number we're funded for, yes. Yes, there's, I think we're about 4,100 now, and I think the figure in the book of estimates for 2024, the staffing limit is 4,119. So we're just about at
And in
our limit.
relation to the special units?
Investigations division?
Yeah.
We have 11 staff there, and 7 of those are investigators, and I think that's, apart from maybe 10 years ago, that's as strong a complement as it's had for quite a number of years.
Right. And I mean, I'm presuming that there would have been fallout from this Primetime Investigates that would have obviously required some additional work, or a substantial amount of additional work on foot of that. Is there anything additional being done? Are there additional people being brought in to
the investigations division?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
We have expert investigators there who are examining this.
Okay. I'm going to leave my questions there. I'll come back in with some further questions.
Sorry, would that pop out for a moment? We had some newly elected MPs from the North Down. Okay, so just to move on with the question, just in relation to the to agency staff, there was 95 in the year in question, 99.5 million cost on that, and there was 91.8 million in 2021. We've had other bodies, and obviously there can be explanations for this, but why is there such a huge spend on agency staff in the department? Is that on veterinary services mainly, or what is it?
Agency staff, Chairman, apologies now, but I'm not quite sure what you mean. Is there something in the appropriation account there that
Well,
would
what
draw
I'm
my
looking at
attention?
is that in relation to the accounts, right? Just 1 second, okay.
I think actually, Chair, it may be pay in the agencies that are under the aegis of the
Yeah,
department.
we've 13 state agencies, and we
those agencies are,
August,
Board
BIM,
SPA.
SPA, yeah, we've 13 of those, yeah.
In terms of agencies within in-house in the department, do you employ a lot of staff or from agencies, or is it mainly
From agencies, no, but for example, in our IT area, we'd have a substantial number of contractors who do the development of our systems under the supervision of our own staff. So that's a kind of a permanent cost, and it's significant. I'm not sure what the figure is now, but it's significant. And in the context of our forestry licensing, for example, we would have run tenders to employ ecology services to help us with licensing.
Okay. And I just want to move on to the situation with the horse industry and with the horse slaughtering, etc. And just on that, just in relation to that, I mean, it's clear. So from the parliamentary question, to reply to that, it's clear from what you said this morning that the department were aware, but we weren't made aware that you were aware that there was an ongoing Garda investigation and that there was a court case. Prosecution being pursued through the courts as well. So we've established that. And could I ask, has the Department of Agriculture interviewed the staff on the matters, any staff that were any involvement with this, either past or present?
Well, I think, in fact, so these events took place quite a long time ago, and I think, in fact, that the people who made the decisions in this case, they're all retired. It was 10 years ago. I think so, yeah.
Is this in relation to, what are you referring to there, Mr. Lees?
In relation to, for example, the approval of the plant and the prosecutions prior to that, and that were concurrent with that approval. But Martin, I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
No, just to clarify, I think like the previous 3 cases were Garda-led investigations, which we were asked to provide witnesses on. The most recent one, which the Secretary General talked about, is a department-led one. And there was also, in parallel, there's another Garda-led investigation in relation to another horse traceability issue, not related to this plant. So there's 2 current cases.
Yes, but in relation to this plant, we've established that there's a Garda investigation, we've established that there is a court proceedings, and we do want to be careful what's been said here. What I'm asking is this, is that any department staff that has had any involvement in the plant in the last 10 years, right, who are not retired, let me put it like that, has there been a discussion with them?
Well, most definitely anyone that had, that are actually, I couldn't say everyone has been spoken to, but I mean, most definitely a lot of the people who actually had some engagement would have been spoken to.
Okay. And just in relation to the Department of Agriculture, you staff on site, and you said I had at a farm attached cruelty was happening, but it was actually in the same complex. The programme showed that it was in the same yard. The building is adjacent to the slaughterhouse. That's the reality. It's connected to it, right? It's not down the road somewhere, okay? So we've established that much. But in terms of the department, that there was wounds on the horses. I bet there would be small wounds, where chips were changed. There was evidence of spray paint being used on horses to cover that. What kind of protocols and processes are there for your staff, when they're visiting sites like that? Now, I know we only do the one horse plant, but, abattoirs in general.
Well, generally, where abattoirs are operating, they operate more than 1 day a week. This particular facility was only operating 1 day a week. So where we have 49 licensed, or I'll correct myself, approved slaughter facilities across the country, dealing with all the species. So generally, there's an assigned veterinary inspector and technical staff to those, and they carry out a range of duties from ante-mortem inspection, post-mortem inspection, hygiene checks, animal welfare checks across the day in relation to the days they're there and slaughter is happening.
And just in relation to the passport and traceability requirements, when they're shown to be deficient, what happens there? Do you win straight away?
Specifically in relation to horses get individual, I suppose, assessment on the basis of they're presented to the veterinary inspector for ante-mortem inspection. At that stage, traceability checks are undertaken. He'd be scanned for a microchip to be checked against the passport in relation to the verification that the animal matches the passport. The microchip is the same, to be cross-checked with the actual central database in relation to see that microchip relates to the horse. Verification that the horse presented is on the central database, that is not excluded from the food chain. And there'll be a clinical assessment of the horse's fitness for slaughter.
And in relation to the slaughtered animal, the questions are asked in relation to, what happens to the meat from that, and we understand that it goes to France. Can you tell me that in relation to, former racehorses, right, which wouldn't be suitable, as I understand it, for human consumption, that can you state categorically that no horses from this plant that were formerly used in the horse racing industry, that the meat from those wasn't exported?
No, I mean, it's quite
the European market.
Sorry, Deputy. Sorry for interrupting. No, I mean, it's quite clear. Ex-race horses were slaughtered at this plant. There's nothing.
I know that.
Yeah.
But what happens to the meat there?
That meat would be inspected, passed for human consumption, and go for human consumption, assuming it was eligible.
Okay, so
there's no prohibition.
All race horses could have been used.
Yeah, there's no prohibition on the slaughter of race
Right.
horses.
Okay.
As long as they're eligible in all other ways, in particular in relation to the actual clarity in relation to medical use.
And the licence for this plant was revoked, as you understand it. The certificate regarding animal welfare, that's been revoked, is that correct?
The license, the approval of the slaughter plant has been revoked. The certificate of competence assigned to one particular individual has actually been revoked as well.
And is that regarding somebody that would have a role in animal welfare?
Yes.
Okay, that's been revoked. So, all good with that. But the horses were moved. Were they moved with the department's approval?
Again, just going back to what my Secretary General said, I think this is all part and parcel of the investigation, and it will be brought before the courts. So I don't really want to comment on a detail of that.
Would have been moved.
Animals have been moved, yes. And the premises was under...
For legal reasons, you're not to clarify whether they were moved with department approval or not.
Pardon?
For legal reasons,
Yeah.
you're not able to clarify this morning whether they've been moved with department approval. Okay.
Could I just say, Chairman, if you don't mind, look, all of the issues, including the revocation of the licence, the approval, the revocation of the certificate, these might all be the subject of proceedings at some time in the very close future.
Just something peculiar about it. I would have thought in a situation like that the horses would be seized once they came to light, that the department would move straight away, because I've seen the department seizing animals before very, very quickly.
No, we didn't seize the horses, but we did issue a control notice that required them to be.
Wouldn't that normally be the default position, though? I don't want to be too specific now with this, but generally when there be evidence of serious animal cruelty.
I think, and Martin can correct me, I think if there were some immediate threat to the welfare of the horses, or some serious illness evidence in them, they might be seized. But I'm not sure that that was the case in this instance. Is that correct, Martin?
Okay. So what was shown on TV wouldn't lead to concerns that there might be an immediate threat to animal welfare?
Well,
if you judge not to seize the animals, that means that what was shown on the primetime programme, that it wasn't judged to be of an extent that there was an immediate threat to animal welfare on that particular farm complex.
well, the question was whether horses remaining on the complex were likely to, their welfare was likely to be compromised after that. And so I mean, that was the question. And again, we're engaged in the step-by-step process here. And we could do things now in response to public pressure that might ultimately compromise our ability to reach our objectives.
Yeah, I'm going back by what I'm just trying to establish what happened. That they weren't seized by the department, and just to say, I'd be correct in saying that, you know, it happens regularly where there are serious animal welfare concerns raised regarding the treatment of animals within buildings or on lands. That department will seize those animals.
If I may, I think the issue it happens occasionally. I wouldn't say regularly.
Yeah, no, I have seen it.
Yeah, it happens regularly. It doesn't happen regularly. It happens occasionally.
Yeah. And rightly so, by the way.
In most welfare cases we investigate, we wouldn't be seizing the animals.
Okay. And what will now happen with the horses that were to be slaughtered? We'll say, what will happen there? Are they being brought to a plant, to slaughtering plants where there are other animals, maybe such as cattle or sheep, slaughtered? Is that likely to happen?
I mean,
obviously, I'm asking you this in a general way because public out there are genuinely concerned about it. They're horrified about it. So I'm asking you is that obviously these animals are going to be slaughtered. So the concern is that, you know, where are they, you know, what's going to happen to them now? So a lot of these horses were going to be slaughtered. That's not there. So is it the case that some of them now will be slaughtered in plants maybe that where cattle are being done? Is that correct? Yeah. And the normal veterinary procedures will be there. Am I correct in saying that it would be a county council vet, not a department, not a department vet that would be present, or maybe both in the case?
I mean, to slaughter horses, a premises needs to be approved, and currently there's no approved equine slaughter premises in the country. Like, it is open for people to apply. So currently there's no approved equine slaughter premises in the country.
But if a plant has to be used, right, none of them have been slaughtered yet, I take it.
There's no horses slaughtered for human consumption since the beginning of June.
Yeah, but you have to do something with these now. And just, these horses were going to be slaughtered. What I'm asking you is, what I'm asking you is that at this point, and this is not the impingement, there isn't an impingement anyway on the legal case being taken, those horses now are there to be slaughtered. What I'm asking you is, I'm aware since last week that there is only one horse slaughtering plant approved in the state, now not approved, so we don't have any now. So now we're in a situation as to what happens now with horses that have to be slaughtered. So your department, and I know this isn't easy, right? But what I'm trying to get the answer to, and please just don't have me going around the houses for half an hour on this. What I'm trying to get to is this, is that there obviously has to be a plan now. There has to be, and the most likely thing I would maybe expect and I'm not an expert in this from my limited knowledge of it, is that a plant that's approved and they're run to a high standard, I know that, and the county council, it's county council vets that oversee them, isn't it? Paid by the county council, approved by your department, that oversee the animals that are going into the food chain. Very high standard, and I acknowledge that high traceability, and what's happened since the 90s has been very good. We all acknowledge that, but I think we have to acknowledge as well it's important as protected, right? And this is anything but good, what's happened here. What I'm asking again is that will these horses now be slaughtered in a plant where cattle maybe would be the most appropriate? Because to me it would seem like the logical thing to do once there's proper veterinary supervision.
So, Chairman, I'm going to try and answer this as best I can. I'm not trying to send you around the houses. So right now, these horses are the subject of a control notice. They can't go anywhere. Right. Okay? They're subject of a control notice. There is no slaughter plant in the country that's available for slaughtering horses. The facilities required for slaughtering horses are quite different to the facilities required for slaughtering bovines. So I can't see that happening, and correct me if I'm wrong, Martin.
What if there's a horse with a broken leg?
So if there's a horse with a broken leg,
yeah,
you can call your vet out and have them humanely put down and
right,
bring them to the knackery.
Okay.
That's a system. And if you have a healthy horse that's not the subject of a restriction notice and is properly identified, it is possible to export those horses. But I believe there haven't been any horses exported for 6 or 7 weeks.
That's the question the public are asking, the likes of me.
Yeah.
Is what happens now.
Yes.
That's clear. You've entered it clearly.
Sorry. And
I understand that.
And when we're finished with this prosecution, then we might have to make a judgment about these particular horses. Right. But in the meantime, people can call their vet out. There's a cost associated with it, and have the horse humanely euthanised on farm.
And is there a level of supervision from the department in relation to these animals where they're being kept now and they're not being mistreated?
We're aware where they are, and we're keeping an eye on the place.
Are you? Yeah, when you say no, keep an eye on it. Just tell me a little bit more what that means.
Well, we don't have a presence there every day. But,
no, I don't expect you to have.
But we're inspecting it.
Yes,
yes,
you are. There is oversight by the department,
yes,
and you're satisfied. That's the key thing. Okay.
Yes.
And a vet would have seen them since.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Okay. Deputy Devlin.
And Mr. Gleeson and other witnesses, you're all very welcome back to the committee, and it's good to engage. Just if I can pick up on that last point, please. So I think you'd said earlier to Deputy O'Cosig that the horses may be on lands that you don't know who owns them. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know who owns the land.
Don't know, okay. No. So, but there are inspections being carried out?
Yes.
Okay. So, it kind of puzzles me, given the concern that has been raised about all of this, that the horses that we know we have concern in relation to could potentially be still in the control and under the guidance, or I was going to say care, but of the same individual that either operates or runs or owns the equine slaughterhouse. Is that true?
Yes.
And does that not bother anybody in the department that actually, so it's the same issue. I know you said you've read the file. I know from what I'm hearing from you today that you are, doing a root and branch, as you said yourself earlier, and that's understandable. But really, from our perspective here, it makes no logical sense whatsoever to have the same individual who is clearly causing concern, and I use that word reservedly, still in control of the same horses. Does that not sit well with the department?
Well, again, Deputy, I just want to be careful here. We're going through a complex set of legal processes.
Just care be taken here, because some of you guys will probably wind up having to give evidence.
It doesn't matter how we feel. We're going through a step-by-step process, and it has to be legally robust, and there will be legal proceedings in both directions, I would imagine.
No, sorry, I should really clarify. I'm actually talking about just process in general here,
Yeah.
right? From the department's perspective. You know, and of any abuse, you know, the individual or creature or whoever is of concern in minding those individuals or items, whatever it might be. You know, that really there needs to be a review of that urgently, I would suggest, separate to what we're talking about. You know, that just has to be better handled, let's put it that way. Can I also ask you then, you mentioned there were previous complaints made. I think you said 5. Over what time period are we talking?
Since 2018.
2018, okay. And you had said that the inspections were carried out, obviously, on these, on the equine slaughterhouse was on the curtilage, I think you said.
Well, I'm not sure if that's the right term, but anyway, it was a farm adjacent to the slaughterhouse.
And for me, how long is that equine slaughterhouse, noting it's the only one in the country, how long has it been in operation?
Yeah, I think the most recent approval was 2015.
Okay. So, was there ever any more than one equine slaughterhouse in the country in operation at any given time?
There were 2 at one point. There was one in Kilkenny.
Okay. And why did Kilkenny cease, or?
Commercial issues, I think, yeah. Okay. This is a once-a-day business for this one slaughterhouse, once a week.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so look, I hear what you're saying, and I know it's a sensitive issue given the time frame that we're operating to right now. But just, can I ask you as well, if there were several slaughterhouses in operation, and one slaughterhouse had previous conviction or conviction while in operation, is the current contract with the department, does that allow that same individual set up under a new name or a new entity and engage with a contract with the department?
That's a good question, and so it's, I suppose we don't have a contract with this individual. We issue an approval.
Sorry, the approval.
And I think what I said earlier was that I mean, essentially, it seems to me, based on my examination of the matter, that the previous approval focused very much on the suitability of the premises, and not on this test of what is a fit and proper person. So various professions have that test, and it's not a simple thing. There's a judicial precedent, and there are professions that don't have that test. So I think one of the things we're doing now in consultation with our lawyers is trying to figure out a protocol that will tell people what test they have to carry out when a person is a fit and proper person. And the kinds of considerations there might be is, how do you handle a corporate application if one individual has been convicted? How do you handle a conviction 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or is a conviction a kind of purgatory in perpetuity? I'm not sure. It could be. How do you handle an ongoing investigation where you have a suspicion but no conviction?
And I presume inspections would flow from that same question as well, additional oversight, etc.
Well, yeah, and I think at the point of approval, I think we have to have a system that says these are the tests that have to be carried out to determine the suitability of an individual. But they have to be based on some robust piece of law, because it's not simple. And in particular, it's not simple when you're dealing with a corporate applicant.
I can appreciate that. Can I just, staying with just the animal cruelty element of things, I know the department was involved with the Department of Rural and Community Development in terms of the control of dangerous dogs. It's something I've raised with you before. And I know the stakeholder engagement group has been established, which is wonderful. But speaking of the kind of license or agreement or whatever that operators might have with the department, regardless of what type of animal we're talking about, I presume when you're talking about a root and branch review of the department's processes and procedures in dealing with any concern or complaint, that this is going to apply across the board. Would that be correct in saying?
Well, that's not what I intended to say. Deputy. So I was talking about the specific incident, and I was talking about horse traceability, in which there are evident circumventions, and I was talking about the processes for approving horse plants. There is a process underway, an interdepartmental process right now with an interdepartmental committee to look at issues in relation to dogs. And, you know, issues relating to the approval of dog breeding premises, for example, they don't reside in our department. They reside with the Department of Rural Affairs, I think. So, I mean, it's imperfect, but I think the fact now that we have an interdepartmental committee at least is trying to cohere the efforts of the various departments and that. But when I spoke about the root and branch review, we have contracted somebody specifically, Professor Paddy Wall, who is a veterinarian and a medical doctor and an expert in the equine sector and a food safety expert. We've contracted him now to do a specific review of the arrangements in relation to horses on foot of this incident. And we hope that he'll come forward with recommendations very quickly.
And what kind of timeline are we talking on that, roughly?
I think a couple of months.
Okay. Can I just, so in terms of the dogs issue, right, or cats, or any other animals, donkeys, you name it, that other shelters are looking after. And there are some specific shelters around the country that deal with specific type of animals for understandable reasons. And then there are other mixed homes, cat and dog home, etc. And I appreciate there is a split between your department and that of Community and Rural Affairs. So it's not straightforward. However, there was €2 million additional given to dog pounds, I think in April of this year. And then there's a whole plethora of criteria in which they can apply for that funding. Where does the responsibility lie? Is it with yourselves or is it with the Department of Rural and Community Affairs if there are concerns about dog pounds or other animal shelters?
Well, we provide funding for animal welfare charities around the country, including some that deal with dogs, and that the number has gone up to 5.8 million actually, I think this year. And we have specific criteria and an application process. Now, I don't think we exercise, I mean, obviously we exercise stewardship over the funding, and we check to see, we expect reports from people to see how they've administered that. If there was a welfare issue in a particular place, Martin, you might help me out.
Well, I think we all revert back to the Animal Health and Welfare. The Animal Health and Welfare Act, which we are policy lead. So if there's any report in relation to animal welfare and it comes to us, we'll investigate it either ourselves directly or through authorised officers that we have in the ISPCA, DSPCA, IHRB.
So that's some clarity to it. In terms of complaints, so would the complaints about any particular pound or operator come to yourselves then directly?
It may or may not. I mean, if it is to do with the operational controls, I mean, there could be contracts between local authorities and some of these facilities.
That's right, yeah.
So, I mean, they may investigate.
But for certain services, see, this is where it gets quite complex, and this is part of the problem. And so what I was referring to earlier, Mr. Gleeson, was when you spoke of a root and branch approach, what I don't want to see is the equine sector being root and branch review and certain criteria being applied, if you can see what I'm getting at here. And then in another section, we're back here in a year's time talking about cats, dogs, donkeys, it doesn't really matter. The fact is we have to have the same approach to operators. And I'm not saying that there's other concerns out there for certain operators. There's one or two that local authorities are dealing with, and you're right, Mr. Blake, that there's certain agreements with local authorities for certain, for dogs being rescued or impounded. But what I'm talking about is overall animal health, and that we have to have a full review to ensure that they're all operating to the same standard, and that the department can categorically tell us here and in the future that actually if somebody has a conviction or if there's concerns, complaints received, that the department has the ability and wherewithal and necessary resources to ensure that there are additional inspections. So the concern that all the deputies here this morning have spoken about, that we are receiving complaints and concerns about from our constituents, are, listened to and acted upon by the department. So I didn't want to put words in your mouth, Mr. Gleeson, but I would like reassurance that when we're talking about animal welfare, absolutely for the equine sector, but I'm talking about overall.
Yeah, so, I mean, firstly, we have a responsibility for animal welfare, which Martin has described there, and we take complaints seriously and we investigate them. There's a very specific issue here on the equines, which we're trying to deal with quickly.
Appreciate that.
Okay,
No,
and
no,
it's
yeah.
distinct from this, and it has to do with the traceability and the system for approval of slaughter plants. And so there may well be issues that need to be resolved between the three departments in relation to cohering our efforts on animal welfare. I accept that, because the system, it's not easy to explain even. So, I mean, it's difficult. But I just don't want that to be confused now with a very specific piece of work we need to do now on these equines, which is not about welfare.
No.
It's about, because the welfare concerns are obvious, but it's about the traceability of equines, which has a European Union dimension to it, and it's about our own processes for the approval of plants.
Well, if I could just say, Chair, just to be clear, no one's saying that work is not essential and urgent. Absolutely. True. But I would like to hear from you that, you know, a similar approach is going to be taken across animal welfare within the department to ensure that we're not back talking about cats or dogs, as I said, or other animals with a similar concern that's just been raised in the equine sector.
Yeah, and I think the interdepartmental group is a first step towards that, so that we are lined up and take a common approach to the
And then finally, can I ask, just you might send on a note of the number of complaints received, please, to the committee of concerns from the public, maybe that the department's received in relation to animal welfare in a more general sense, maybe specific to different categories of pounds or shelters, please, because I think that's something that we'll be returning to when you return to the committee. Thank you.
And we'll certainly do that. And just to say, like, so sometimes we examine these places. Sometimes there are very serious issues. Sometimes there are issues that guidance can help people with. Sometimes there are issues where you might have to issue a control notice. So the extent and nature of some of these issues are different. And so I can't say there's a kind of there isn't a common result from all of these inspections, because some of them might involve people who are in, you know, difficult circumstances themselves. But we do take these issues very, very seriously. It doesn't always result in a prosecution. It depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, could I just ask before we break that, and you're correct, someone would be, you know, the person with the animals could be somebody in difficult circumstances, an elderly person, there could be other issues. I've come across it, yeah. Okay, we accept that. But just in relation to the issue of, and you have to operate with the policy that you're given, and you have to operate within the law. Understand that. But just in a general way, in relation, one of the things that surprised me as we started looking at this 2 weeks ago was that, and last week here, was that some person with a conviction 3 years and 1 month ago, right, can become an animal welfare officer, right, or they could be running an abattoir, and that shocked me.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me just say this to you, that 3 years, so if I'm convicted of serious animal cruelty 3 years and a month ago, because it's over 3 years, I can apply for a licence to run a slaughterhouse, or I can have animals in my care, or I can become an animal welfare officer. That, you know, and I understand you mentioned about the corporate situation because you have a number of people involved, but the individual people, and I'm talking generally here, I don't want to be zooming in that particular case in Kildare, but that the individual who's performing the role of an animal welfare officer, that they can be that to me it sounds bananas.
Yeah.
To be honest with you.
So, Chairman, you're talking common sense now, but like the reality is that somebody who applies for certification as an animal welfare officer is required to make a declaration that they haven't had a conviction in the previous 3 years and do the training, and I think that's based on European Union law.
Right.
And like in the context of our review now, which is going to be fast, that might be something we would look at, but I'm not sure.
Mr. Cleason, can I ask you, might be, and European Union law, can I just deal with those two things, right?
Yeah.
That the European Union law, we still have a little bit of latitude in this country as to what laws we can make. And unless there was some serious impediment, you know, unless somebody, Ursula von der Leyen or somebody jumps up and said, no, stop, which I'd surprised if they did, you can't do this, but that surely is one area that we're going to have to do something about. I mean, it's absolute bonkers to think that can happen. And not, you're working under the strictures, the law that's given to you, I understand that. I'm trying to, but I just think that if there's one, there'll be a number of lessons out of this, but one of the ones that jumped out straight away at me was that I was really, really surprised by that.
So just lest the word might have misled people, like that is one of the areas we're asking for this quick review on. And so that is something we're going to consider. But it's kind of complex enough legal stuff, you know. So if somebody has a conviction, do you ban them in perpetuity from? So I'll give you an example. The courts convict people of animal welfare offences, and they can choose to apply a fine, or they could choose to issue some kind of an order disbarring that person from keeping animals again. And they don't always do that second thing. They don't always do that. So I'm simply saying that these are the kind of legal issues that we have to be careful to. But of course, that's exactly the sort of thing we're going to look at.
If you're looking at, and it's not an area that we go into here, we say case law or anything like that, but in relation to case law, I would be surprised if there isn't cases, and just kind of rewinding my head here in terms of, you know, what you would see coming before the court sometimes, cases that would stand out, that where somebody would be prohibited from keeping animals forever, right? And I'm not saying that that's not appropriate in every case, but I just thought that 3 years that you could be running one of these plants, you could also be the animal welfare officer, and, you know, you could have a conviction 3 years and a day ago or a month ago, and all fine and dandy. I just think it is one. I know you would flag up this for government and for the Oireachtas, but there's one area I think that you need to flag up in human rights, is that area. And I think a recommendation from this committee will be that, because I mean, never mind the animal cruelty is the awful part of it, but this has financial implications for this state. You know, we have a very important meat industry, which everybody's working hard to protect. And, you know, I know it's horses, but when the word goes out, gets out across the world media, European media, we all know the damage that can do. You know, we've seen with the beef industry, for example, the damage that's done with China, how long it took to actually get that industry going again. You know, and the department had put an awful lot of work into it. And I just think it's, you know, we've done very well on the farm sector in terms of from what I can see, right? Generally, it works very well to acknowledge that. But I just think this horse industry has been you know, we have had our eye off the ball on this one, and I'm saying collectively as a state and public representatives as well now, this should make us say up. But yourselves, I think you should flank that up. I think that I don't want to prejudge what the committee will come with, but I'd imagine this committee, or maybe the Agriculture Committee, would have a recommendation on that, right? Yeah,
so I was before the Ag Committee last week, and I mentioned Professor Paddy Wall and the work he's doing. So this is exactly one of the issues he's going to be looking at. And there may be guidance available from other professionals. I mean, I'm sure for example, I'm sure the concept of fit and proper person exists in relation to the legal profession or the medical profession. So there might be guidance in all of that for us. But it's tricky enough, that's all I'm saying. And the 3 years, I mean, I agree with what you say, but the 3 years is based on European Union law, as I understand it. But okay, we will be looking at that with a view to tightening up in a way that reflects public opinion and common sense, I think.
But also the protection of animals,
yeah,
which is important.
Of course.
And protecting our food industry. We need to have those two things to the fore as well. So look, we're going to take a short break, so I'm going to suspend the meeting for 10 minutes, and we'll resume in 10 minutes sharp.
Thank you. Thanks.
And the next speaker to come back in is Deputy O'Costley. If we take 10 minutes again, Deputy.
That's great, Chair. Thank you very much. Do a couple of just boiler house ones. First and foremost, kind of nuts and bolts. Non-compliance with procurement rules. We unfortunately have a trend here. So I think it was 3.5 million in 2022, which were 44 contracts. 2021, it was 3.8 million, which related to 64 contracts, and 2020 was 3.5 million relating to 64 contracts. So we're up around the 3.5 million most years. I guess the first question I wanted to ask was whether many of these non-compliant contracts were what we might call repeat visits, so from the same contractors, or whether we're talking about completely different set of contracts.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'll just go through so we've about 100 million euro in procurement, 3.5 million. We're not a bit complacent about it, and we're working hard to make that better every year. About 1 million of that involved 11 contracts where the processes were intended to comply, but where the price that came in exceeded the threshold for the relevant process. So we did engage in a process, but so that was about 1 million. Almost 350,000 involved cases of urgency, and that was where we had to dispose of biological waste because of avian influenza. So we had to do those quickly. And maybe we should put some more permanent arrangement in place for that kind of eventuality, but in any event, we didn't have a pre-existing contract for that. And then there is another category where some of them were rolled over. Some contracts were rolled over when they shouldn't have been. And I think we're really going to focus in on those now and try and get rid of that practice.
We just wanted to ask about the duplicate payments.
Yeah.
Fairly significant, 2 duplicate payments. Fully recovered?
Yes. So again, 2 payments involved. One was from our payroll, we have obligations to make payments to the revenue commissioners for the various deductions we make. And that's an automated system, but this was down to human error and I suppose process. An individual or 2 separate individuals made a manual payment and an automated payment in respect of the same thing to the revenue commissioners. It was noticed more or less immediately and recovered. That was about 6 million.
Just put my mind at rest. There was 5 instances of fraud, and we've 2 duplicate payments. No link between the 5 instances of fraud and the duplicate payment.
No. And the second one was to another state agency. The second one was to Board BIA in relation to their quality assurance scheme, and we had made an advance payment in the previous year, which was notified on the file, but then the payment in the following year was made in full without regard to the fact that we had already made an advance payment. And again, that was recovered immediately. It was about €1 million. So they were the 2 instances. But obviously, we've changed our processes and made sure that there's kind of more supervision in relation to those things, so they can't happen again.
I have an oral question coming in as well, so I'm a little bit under pressure with the clock, both from the chair and from the Dáil. Just picking up on a point that Deputy Devlin was making about, our need to be able to look at animal welfare holistically and not just concentrate on this abattoir issue, which is the latest issue. But like, we had RTE in here last year with their own travails, but there's absolutely no doubt that they have done some very good public service broadcasting in this area. So I'd refer back to Dairy's Dirty Little Secret, which is around that live export issue. Also their coverage of the greyhounds issue. And so for us to be saying, well, our first step is to do a root and branch, I wonder what our first steps were in those instances as well. This is not the first issue to arise under your department. I want to ask about the external review on Horse and Greyhound Fund, which I believe was announced this week. Is that right? And the terms of reference speak about whether the prize funds are represent best value for money, and the taxpayer would have a very clear opinion on that before ever a review is done. The efficacy of animal welfare standards, I'd have a clear view on that before I saw any external review, and review of governance framework between the IHRB and the HRI. Again, I don't think I need Mazars or anybody else to inform me much on this. Has it been included in the terms of reference to examine the 80-20 split between horses and greyhounds?
No. And I think we had a long discussion on this last year, Deputy, and I indicated that That was a,
I know it's a matter
that
of
was a matter
policy.
of government policy, and it's a matter of, it's provided for in law, so.
No, I know it's a matter of government policy, and
That
I
can
know
be
that you're
changed.
constrained.
Government policy can determine what that is. And I think we discussed the pros and cons of it last year.
Was it considered for putting into the terms of reference for this external review?
No, no.
So this external review will be entirely silent on that,
Yeah.
that legislative
Yeah.
line?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a view on that as well. What's the cost of the external review?
Well, I think we have to put it to tender. So I don't think, we don't know what the cost is yet.
Okay, so how far, we're not far down the line. We've announced an intention to have an external review, is that right?
We've the terms of reference ready, and it'll be going to tender
Frameworks will be engaging consultants as soon as we get the Mazars.
as soon as we get the Mazars report, the final Mazars report, because obviously that's a vital part of the,
Have we a timeline?
the next month or so.
That's for the tendering
You might
process,
get
and then
it,
the
yeah.
tendering process will take a certain amount of time.
So-
In the terms of reference, what's the length? Surely in the terms of reference, you're including a reporting time.
Yeah, so we're just waiting on the Mazars report, as Sec Gen has said. So we have the terms of reference ready. There's what's it called, a framework now in place for consultancies of this type. It's a procurement framework, so we would engage with the individuals that are on that, or the companies that are on that framework, to assess their willingness. So the first person on that framework will go to them. We'll outline the terms of reference, and we'll agree a cost in line with the framework agreement, and we'll also agree a time frame, deputies.
Okay. When we're hearing on this latest issue with the abattoir, that, we're going to do a written branch, and our first thing is an urgency and all the rest of it. And then we have a response to another RT Investigates programme of fully a year ago. And I'm being told that we've looked at terms of reference, and we're thinking about bringing something to tender. It doesn't speak to me of urgency. But when we saw the conditions that those dogs are kept in, when we see those shocking figures around, possibly 6,000 greyhounds a year being culled just because they're not fast enough, and we can't find a use for them, I don't think it's good enough that we're coming back 12 months later with terms of reference. And I also don't know why we have to go externally when we have already a remove between the governing bodies and the overseeing department. We have Bord na Gan there, we have the IHRB, we have the HRI. Why we need to be going externally, I'll be quite honest, it speaks to me of Sir Humphrey's tactic. And what we'll do is we'll put it for an external report, we'll kick it to the long grass, and sure, in the meantime, we'll have a change of government, and all will be right in the world. I want to ask a little about biosecurity. Can you give me a rough figure? And I'm sure it's an enormous figure, but what's ash dieback going to cost us as a country between, the commercial revenues lost and the cost of remediating? Have you?
If you don't mind, Deputy, I might ask Paul Savage to just come in on that.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Deputy. We think the overall figure, will come to somewhere in the region of 270 million altogether. And that'll be broken down by 237 million, if I have the figure here. That'll be broken down by the overall amount already paid to recipients under the previous reconstitution schemes of 10 million, site clearance under the new scheme in relation to the reconstitution.
I just wanted the headline figure, and just not to interrupt you, but
237 million in total.
Yeah. What are we spending on biosecurity? The controls.
More generally, in terms of biosecurity, or particularly?
Yeah, so the biosecurity controls, particularly on the importation of plants.
On the importation, I don't have that figure in front of me, but I can come back to you with it.
Because the 237 odd million is, we're a quarter of a billion, more or less. I'm looking at this from the perspective of fire blight, and it's here. We have an issue. It took us too long with ash dieback. We should have been much stricter. Whether we could have prevented it crossing the Irish Sea with weather conditions X, Y, and Z, I don't know. That point is moot. But I think fire blight is a real and present danger. Maybe not commercially in the same way, looking at the species that affects, but the wildlife implications and the implications on our hedgerows up and down the country, I don't think that can be dismissed or diminished. are we adequately controlling the plants that are coming in here? And are we adequately controlling, I suppose, instances of fire blight that we're finding within the countryside to actually try and do what we didn't manage to do with ash dieback, and that is to prevent the spread of this disease throughout the countryside?
So, Deputy, I mean, obviously we're a member of the European Union and we're part of various trade agreements and we operate the controls.
We do have biosecurity as an island, though. We
do, but
we can control the plant species and animal species that are coming in.
In accordance with European Union law, and we do that, and we meet our requirements, and we have staff, and I'll come back to you with the costs at ports that check these things in accordance with European Union law, and products that come in and plants that come in are certified by the state from which they come, and that's kind of the way the system works. So, I mean, we do apply those biosecurity rules. Are they perfect? Well, no system can be perfect when you're dealing with a disease.
Well, can you refer to us with a quantum of funding? Because, you know, the old Joe Biden line, if you show me the budget, I'll be able to tell whether you care about it or not.
Well, we do care about it.
Thank you, Chair.
In relation to, just to follow on to that question, in relation to biosecurity, that with now that we have a sea border in place between England, Scotland and Wales and Ireland, in relation to the ports of Belfast and Larne, etc., is, you know, obviously there's a risk there because we quite rightly have an open border, you know, and I look forward to the day when there isn't one at all. But have there been discussions with the control, with the people doing the control in the north, in terms of at those ports, the people who are supervising that in relation to the hard agriculture in the north, that are they robust enough? Because obviously, you and I know this, there's some people who have farms each side of the border. There's houses that are split by the border where the bedroom is in the north and the kitchen's in the south, but there's fields the same, you know, where the farmer steps over the fence and he's, you know, so obviously the risk there, there's a huge risk there, but just is the sea border checks robust enough? And have you looked at this?
So I think we did chat about this last year as well, and what I said is that we first of all we've to rely on DAERA to do their job in Northern Ireland, and that's what their obligation is. And if we didn't rely on the competent authorities in other member states across the European Union to do their job, we'd have no single market. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there is Commission supervision of what's going on in the north. So the Commission have people inspecting this and making sure they're complying with the rules. And the third thing is that we have very close relationships with the people in the north. I met with my counterpart last Wednesday. Actually, she was down in my office. So we have very close relationships with the people in the north. So we don't have a supervisory role in relation to what's going on in the. I know you understand that, but
the people who do it.
But we do have a very close relationship with them, and there is oversight from the Commission.
Yes.
Because they're operating a system that's agreed upon under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement between the UK and the European Union.
Just you recall with the foot and mouth that the fact that we operated the sea border right around the island, it worked, and it's just that there needs to be, I know politically some people might be happy with it, but the real world is the real world and reality is reality.
Well,
just for you to give that reassurance that
No, there's very close contact, and just I'm around a long time, so I was involved in the foot and mouth thing intimately, and
I know that.
Don't forget we had checks on the border with foot and mouth. We had police and customs officers checking food coming across the border during foot and mouth. So notwithstanding the fact that we engaged with the north on border controls at that time, we did checks on the border, and we don't want to go back there.
Yeah, absolutely. But there has been an all-Ireland approach, and that's important that's working.
We have an all-Ireland approach to animal health, and we cooperate on research and on TB and various other things.
Yeah, thank you. David Murphy, 10 minutes.
Yeah, I've been told, Mr. Gleeson, that there have been cases of veterinary inspectors who've declined to take up posts because their duties would include Shannonside. Can you confirm that?
I can't, but I'll defer to Martin if you know. I'm not aware of that, Deputy, but I'm not saying it's not true.
Will you come back? Will you check it out and come back to me?
I will.
That? And how long have the current veterinary inspector or the superintendent veterinary inspector been in situ?
I can't say with absolute certainty.
Could you come back to us with that and
Yeah,
tell us
we'll
how
come
long,
back, yeah.
and how long were their predecessors? I want to see if there's churn here, and what that might be. I just get the impression very often when there's European oversight, real attention is paid to it, you know, and that we pay less attention if we pay, let's say, we pay more attention when there's European oversight. Would you accept that that is the case?
I'm not sure that there's not European oversight over the system we have here, and it's compliant with European Union law. So that's the reality, and it's clear that the system can be circumvented. But it's also clear that some of the events in this programme took place in other member states, and so like it has to. This is to be tackled effectively. I absolutely agree with this. It has to be tackled at European Union level. It's not just an Irish issue.
Except that
Yeah.
and I saw the programme and that came across, I think, very clear. It is not unique to one location, but we have a responsibility for here. And people will, just on another aspect, people always will try and get around systems, and we understand that. And it's the responsibility is to make sure that you close those off. Presumably you would have been aware of, you know, pre-coded microchips or blank microchips or encoding machines and things like that. Is that something that the department is aware of, has systems to deal with? You might just give us a brief reply on that.
As far as I'm aware, and I defer to Martin, we check for duplicate microchips in the plant. So there's a check for microchips at the plant.
Not just in that one plant. Is that routine, presumably?
Well, we don't check every place in the country that has horses.
But you'll have spot checks, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, wherever we apply controls, I mean, we would use the opportunity to check the microchips. I mean, and occasionally, like we do come across second microchips in horses, and sometimes that's for legitimate reasons. Like there've been a number of horses on the database that would have two microchips because the first might have stopped working and a second one was put in, and it would have been juxtapositioned, so the two numbers would be on the database associated with that horse. So I mean, microchips are not the be all and end all, you know. So there are difficulties with microchips, and I suppose that's one of the issues that we'll be looking at in the context of the review Paddy Wall is doing with us.
We got a reply from you in relation to some of the questions that some of us asked the day HRI were in. And you told us in relation to the total number of horses were slaughtered, say 2023, 1,987, of which 1,434 were registered thoroughbreds. If they're registered thoroughbreds, doesn't assume that they have raced, but I presume, do you know how many have raced and would have been excluded from the food chain?
Well, my understanding is, I mean, racing doesn't exclude you from the food chain. What excludes you from the food chain is the potential that you might have received certain medicines during your career. But it is lawful, correct me if I'm wrong, Martin, it is lawful to slaughter horses, including thoroughbreds and thoroughbreds that have raced. But if they have been administered with certain kinds of medicaments, they can't be slaughtered for human consumption.
And so they're excluded from, they should have been excluded, say, from Shannonside. There wouldn't be a mixture.
Only excluded, they should be excluded from the food chain if they have certain kinds of medicines administered to them, and there should be a record of those medicines on the passport.
So if they were coming from a training yard, presumably they would have raced, and there would be a higher possibility of them being administered with those kind of medicines.
Well, the evidence you'd have, imperfect as it might be, the evidence you would have should be on the passport. So one of the things we might consider now, for example, Deputy, is, for example, we're developing an e-passport system. So that might have the medicines records on it. We're looking at the possibility of DNA type identification. So, I mean, potentially we could require people to register a DNA sample, and then we could test the carcass, for example, after after slaughter and make sure it's the same horse. And we're also developing a veterinary prescription system, a national veterinary prescription system with an IT-based system and we could link those systems up. These are all possibilities that we're looking at and that we'd expect Paddy Wall to look at.
I presume e-prescriptions and things like that in the same...
No, precisely. But just, I mean, I think there are three things there. One is whatever we have to do has to be lawful, and it might require us to change the law. It has to be effective. So we just want to make sure that whatever we do here actually works and isn't circumventable.
Okay, the information we got on that reply, it gave us numbers, but it wasn't getting to the issue that I was looking for. Really, I mean, were there horses rejected? Like I presume that they're in a yard, for example, they'll, as you say, humanely put an animal down if it's injured or whatever, and it doesn't go, it goes to an ackery.
But that's a fair question, where the horse is rejected. So, I mean, clearly, if the passport indicates that it's been administered a medicine that it shouldn't have, that horse should be rejected. If there's a doubt as to the identification, that horse should be rejected. I would imagine horses are rejected occasionally, but I don't have the numbers. But again, Deputy, I'm happy to come back to you.
Okay, if you would, please.
Yeah.
There was media reports about another case in front of Kilkenny Circuit Court that's presumably still ongoing. That was to do, I understand, with laundering animals to go into the food chain. Is that nearing a conclusion? Am I right on that?
Yeah, I can't talk specifically on the detail of it. It just doesn't come to me. But I do know the court case is still before the courts. It's due back in court again shortly, I understand. But
Okay.
at the top of my head, I just can't recall the detail of the case.
So I'm presuming that there's one equine abattoir. So look, I won't press it because I understand that there's...
I can clarify, Deputy, it's not related to the Curtin case.
Right, okay. Just wondering in relation to veterinary surgeons, do you have a role there in, do you have a role in, an oversight role at all in relation to veterinary surgeons? Like, would you refer them, or would you have ever had cause to refer people to their, to the veterinary council, for example?
Yes, the Veterinary Council is a body under the aegis of the department. It's not funded by the department, but that's the way it operates. I don't think we nominate people. We may nominate, actually, have a nominee on the board of the Veterinary Council. Have we ever referred anybody to the Veterinary Council? I can defer to the CVO on that.
Indeed, we do. I mean, if we engage with or come across veterinary practitioners who we believe are behaving inappropriately, we have on occasions reported them for investigation by the Veterinary Council.
Okay. I'm aware of one case that was in my own constituency in the courts, and I don't think it actually went to. I don't think it went to the Veterinary Council. I would have thought a prosecution would have been a trigger for that. But would the Veterinary Council have the ability to investigate themselves, or would they require a complaint? Do you know?
I would clarify that the department has prosecuted veterinary practitioners in the past as well in relation to non-compliance with law, for which we have responsibility.
Okay.
And then in the context of the Veterinary Council, they have their own investigators, and they can actually take sanction against veterinary practitioners independent of the department.
Okay. Would you mind giving us a note on that, just so as we can see just the chain of things and the numbers as well in recent years? So prior to an investigation, like one of the things, when the most recent licence was granted, the court cases that were ultimately dismissed were still live. Would that not have been a, and given, would that, I just can't get, I can't get my head around the idea that there were live cases. It wasn't determined. We know that the people weren't told that there was the date of the court case, and that's just really incredible. But that was still live. You couldn't have presumed on the outcome of that. Is it a question that there was only one abattoir, or was there another one at that stage, and that you wanted to avoid live exports, which also have animal welfare issues? Did you accept a lower standard? What was going on there?
First of all, the case where our witness wasn't called, I think, which you mentioned there, that wasn't the one that was kind of going on, I think, at the time of the approval. That was a prior case at the time of the approval. Look, Deputy, I mean, I suppose I'm acknowledging that the process it wasn't evident to me from examining the process on the file that this was a consideration. So, I didn't see any evidence that...
You'd have to describe that as a failure, a complete failure.
Yeah, well, perhaps, and that's why we're reviewing the process now. But all I'm saying is that that will not be a simple matter. And the question about whether, on the basis that somebody is being prosecuted, you could prevent them from running a business, I'm not sure what the answer to that question is. But these are questions we have to answer in consideration of this matter, because I think at least there should be a formalised process which assesses this fitness to operate standard that's in the regulation, and we didn't have that. So I'm acknowledging that, Deputy. I am.
So when you're going to prosecute, you obviously have to go through a system. It'll have to be sanctioned. Like, it's not one individual that willy-nilly decides this. There'll be a structure, and there'll be, there'll be a group. Who's on that group? And how senior is that decision making at?
Yeah, well, at one time, I think these decisions were made by. There are different ways a prosecution might be initiated. They might be initiated with a local office, and I'm going to ask Martin to come in here and help me. Or they might be initiated through the investigations division. And we did establish an oversight group in relation to the investigations division. In part, because I'll give you an example, Deputy. You raised an issue with me a couple of years ago about a prosecution that was an instance where we didn't prosecute somebody in an animal welfare case. You probably remember it.
I do indeed, but remember it well.
Yeah, and that decision was made at the appropriate level. It certainly wasn't made at a senior level. But at the time, it was the subject of some public controversy. And the individual concerned, or the people who made the decision, might have made it for the best of reasons. But I felt at the time that they really had no protection, for that kind of judgment that they made. And it was partly in response to that we wanted to make sure that if the division were, for example, to decide, well, we've evidence here, on balance, it's unlikely to succeed. On balance, there are external factors. There'll be some kind of a system for assisting those people to do it. That was part of the reason. So Martin, you might just elaborate a little bit on that. So, the line responsibility for the investigations division is with our head of corporate affairs. And who the specific members are on the committee. Obviously, the head of corporate affairs would be on it. Our legal services division would be on it. And Martin, you might know who else is on it.
The third person on that is Dr. Joan Fanning, the Deputy CVO. So that group will oversee any proposal to prosecute, and they will either approve or seek further information or decide prosecution shouldn't happen.
But it would be unusual for that group to determine not to prosecute. I'm not sure if it's happened based on if the recommendation from the investigations division was different. So that's not the intention.
Okay, it's good to know that there was a system put in place, and I understand your thinking on that. Just can you tell us who signed the licence? Is it one individual that signed the licence for Shannonside?
The issue of the approval would have been on the basis, it would be signed by the head of the relevant division on the basis of
what was the relevant division there?
Meat and meat hygiene division.
Right.
So I think, just for the purpose of slight elaboration, there'd be a veterinary inspection of the premises, and then they'd come back with some kind of a recommendation, and the formality, the administrative task of issuing the approval would fall to that division.
Okay. If you come back for...
I want to go back on.
Yeah, no bother. And just in relation to where cattle are being slaughtered and other animals, that the county council, they're a county council vet, right? Isn't that correct? County vet, they're called.
There are county council vets, yeah.
And the money for them comes from your department to the county council. It's what's called a contrite, no? I'm just trying to remember from the budget.
The money, I mean, the funding for county council's veterinary service,
yeah,
in relation to the supervision of those smaller slaughter plants would come through the FSAI, as far as I'm from the Department of Health to the FSAI to those plants, Food Safety Authority of Ireland.
Right, that's okay. No,
yeah,
because I remember it's a contract, what the county council would call a contract, every each year to come on the budget. Yeah, and your department, those vets would be approved by your department, would they, or?
No.
No, would be qualified, obviously qualified.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to be a standard that have to meet.
And so we are looking at subsuming those plants and those vets into the department to have a single kind of authority supervising all meat plants in the state. We're looking at that at the moment.
I think it'd be important though, because the number is small.
Yeah.
You know, abattoirs attached maybe to a butcher shop that would operate to high standards. It's important that they're not poor business with, in terms of, because they're probably the ones that were doing it, probably using the best practice, you know. Could I ask just before we move away from horses, just in relation to, there's just one issue that's on my mind about it, and has come up here a few times, that the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board, right, they're funded by Horse Racing Ireland. The funding goes from your department, goes from the Dáil to your department, it goes to Horse Racing Ireland, who in turn fund the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board, who in turn regulate what's happening under the aegis of Horse Racing Ireland. And it's just in terms of, you know, it would seem like there's a conflict of interest there, that in terms of that, you know, well, I better not complain too much about my funder, because, you know, we have to go, we depend on the cheque every year. And just briefly, could you just address that, you know, is that something that crosses your department, your senior officials, in terms of any consideration of that?
Well, I was involved in the Horse Racing Ireland Amendment Bill in 2016, I think, and this was one of the things we kind of reflected collectively on in the committee, and one of the issues. And look, there's a tradition here. There are traditional bodies, the Turf Club and the National Hunt Club, and they've refereed racing for 150 years. So the question was, how do you improve their accountability, but allow them to exercise their independence? And the IHRB was kind of a solution to that, where we gave it a kind of a legal identity in the context of the specific functions they exercised under the Act, and we made them independent. And I think, and I'm going to double check this, I think we built into the Act a provision where if there was some disagreement about the funding with HRI, that there was some kind of an arbitration procedure built into the Act. So I think that's there, Deputy. I'd just like to double check now.
We've raised this with IHRB here in this committee room, and they've assured us that they don't feel that there's that it impinges in any negative way, but just, you get the point I'm making?
It's a really legitimate question, and it's one we did consider when we put the Act through. But what I would say is, what might be a guide is, if you look at the funding given to IHRB over the last few years, it's increased.
I know that.
So it hasn't kind of.
You might just clarify that point when you come back with a different piece of information. That is there an arbitration?
Yeah, I think there is. Yeah, but I'll check.
Could I raise the issue? Raise the issue of the TV scheme, right?
Yeah.
Bovine TB, because it's one, you know, and the committee, you know, previous hearings, we've done a report on it, we put in some recommendations, and I want to just revert back to this, because it's obviously, it's been longer than I'm around. It has been a problem in this country. The incidence of it is increasing. I think, if I heard correctly, in the last few days, that the incidence in the first 6 months of this year is up again. And we're gone from, it went from 3.27% of the herd, of the bovine herd, to 4.7 or 4.99 in Q1 2024, right? That's been the increase. So we're gone from just slightly over 3% to 5% of the herd. Now that's a serious jump, okay? And you outlined in correspondence to us that that we got last week, that the reasons this research has found, research has been done, research has found that the principal cause of TB introduction and spread include movement of cattle and with undetected infection, residual infection in cattle previously exposed to TB, spread across farm boundaries, indirect spread through biosecurity breaches. Now you might tell me what you mean by that, and the spread with badgers to cattle, and deer will be another one that comes up in some areas. But that number 4 that you named, indirect spread through other biodiversity breaches. Briefly, what do you mean by that?
I'm going to defer to Martin on this, but just to say the herd incidence now, first 6 months of 2024 is 5.12%.
It's really concerning.
It is really concerning.
Farmers are terrified, Mr. Leeson.
Yeah.
They are, been talking to some of them and they really are concerned about this.
And I think we're up at a point now where we have to do something different, because if we just keep doing the same things.
I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute.
But yeah.
Just in relation to that.
What that was intended to convey was, transport, sharing of transport vehicles, sharing of farm machinery, that type of thing, where there's actually people are working together as they might have done in the past, but obviously that would facilitate the spread of disease from farm to farm. So that was just that was a catch-all for that sort of.
We could have suggested that, given the scale of it, that we've gone that at the rate it's increasing, it'll be double very soon if we don't do something about it. That nearly the word emergency, I think, needs to be put. This needs to be treated as emergency by the department and by the agriculture sector, because it has the potential to. This has the potential to spread. I mean, it's high levels of contagion, and it's been a problem. I know that going back into the 40s and 50s, there you heard about it. You'd hear about it as a child. I remember hearing about the fear of TB in the herd. Could I ask just in relation to what is the current projection for funding required for the TB programme going forward, considering that increase in incident rate? Because I previous hearing you said that it would take 1 billion over a period of 10-year period, because if we're going to, the aim is to eradicate it by 2030, but we're going completely in the opposite direction. If we've gone from just over 3% to now we're over 5%. What's the level of funding that's needed now? What's the assessment now?
Well, I think by the end of this year we'll need about 80 million for the exchequer contribution.
That's not counting the salary costs.
No.
It's a huge increase. Yeah. The part coming from the European Union is 2 or 3 million a year, according to some notes that we have here.
And that disappears after this year.
Right. So we're on our own after that. So it's farmers and the taxpayer after this.
Yeah, and the figure I've given you is the taxpayer.
Yeah.
And then farmers pay for their first test, obviously. So that costs 45 or 46 million a year, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then there are levies on sales of meat and milk and exports, and so they bring out. The
taxpayer piece this year, you're looking at going from 57 million in 2022 to over 80 million. Over 80 million.
Could be about 80 million this year.
Now, why, at a time when we're putting a significant funding into it, why is it increasing? I mean, you gave us those 6 reasons. Those 5 reasons I read out. Is there one single thing that can be done to try and stop the spread? Because there's huge, obviously, implications for the dairy industry and for the public purse and for our, just as a food producing island, it has huge implications. For what I'm hearing here this morning.
Well, the short answer is there isn't one single thing that can be done, but there are things that can be done, and they'll be difficult. So for example, so the herd incidence is 5%. That means 95% of herds don't have this disease at the moment, right? So how do we stop the disease getting to those herds? It could mean restrictions on movement from positive herds. It could mean technology. We know they're exploring the possibility of vaccination in the UK, but vaccination could have implications for trade. And historically, the difficulty with vaccination was it was difficult to tell the difference between a vaccinated animal and a positive animal. So there were kind of surveillance complications, but they may have cracked that now. But I do think, Deputy, and there is the wildlife issue and the deer, and we're looking at all of those issues. But I do think there has to be a step up in action now. And we're working with farmers through a TB forum. But I can tell you, some of what emerges might be contested. And we really have to make sure we stop this disease spreading. And a big part of the spread is farm-to-farm movement between animals.
Is one part of it as well the significant expansion of the herd? I mean, there's herds now, where there was 50 cows, there's 1,000 now. There's 1,000. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, the scale of, like, that presents, to me, as a layperson, it presents a huge risk.
Yeah, well, there are very few 1,000 cow herds, but you're right. Larger herds contribute to the risk, and they contribute to the cost. Because if they go down, you have a lot more animals to pay for.
Could I ask, just in relation to that money, but say, that you're looking at, let's say you've mentioned the spend from the taxpayer, but you're looking at 100 million a year, all in, or in excess of 100 million a year. What exactly? What are the type of things, just for the public and for ourselves here? What is the money spent on?
Well, I'm just looking at. I have a table here, but Martin might.
Couple, just to give us.
Yeah. So, for example, compensation. So the compensation out of the 57 million in 2022, 26.5 million was spent on compensating. So there'd also be kind of administrative costs like tuberculin. There'd be the wildlife programme and the costs associated with that. There'd be testing, so the department covers the costs of the second tests. So all of those things. But the biggest part of the exchequer contribution would be compensation to people.
And in terms of vaccinations, what level of vaccination is there at the moment? Is there, is anything being done in terms of?
Yeah, so we don't vaccinate cows because of the complexities, and
milk,
we might crack that at some point in the future. But we vaccinate badgers.
Right.
So I think last year we vaccinated about 9,000 badgers. So it's a programme for government commitment to increase the rate of vaccination. And the badger is a protected species. So I think we're now vaccinating more badgers than we're culling. So we've really advanced that. So I'm not sure what the figures for last year for culling were, but in particularly bad outbreaks where there's a badger association, we might still cull, but our preference is to vaccinate. And the evidence we have is that that's no less effective than culling. Yeah.
Could I ask you just, sorry, Mr. Blake, you wanted to come in there briefly.
Well, he's given me some useful figures, actually. So in 2023, 9,062 badgers were captured in vaccination areas. And of those, 5,116 of them were newly vaccinated. So the rest had already been vaccinated. And in 2023, by way of comparison, 6,308 badgers were removed.
Just that headline figure again, the most recent one for vaccinations, many.
So 9,062 were captured in those vaccination areas. 5,116 were newly vaccinated. So the other ones captured had already been vaccinated.
Just ask you, what areas of the country are, Clare is a low level now, it was very high. What counties are showing up now as in red lights?
I think in the context of disease in cattle, the highest incidence would be in the major dairy areas, the larger outbreaks in the
North Cork.
Yeah, in the general Cork area,
Vale.
but also in the northeastern area as well, in the Cavan Monaghan region.
Okay.
But it is associated with larger herds, more cows being reactors now than would have been in the past.
So there's correlation between the very large herds. It would appear to be a correlation here between the high incidence rate of TB and where large herds are concentrated. Yeah. Those typical herds often say from 200 cows up.
Like where you're greater gathering of animals, the spread will happen within the herds more easily. So you'll have more reactors within those side of herds once infection gets in.
Okay. But in terms of then that, we're looking at the strategy was to eradicate by 2030. How realistic is that now, Mr. Gleeson?
Well, I mean, it's a huge challenge. I think we had this discussion last year as well, like, should we call this an eradication strategy? Well, we're required to call it an eradication strategy, and if we didn't, and that has to be our objective. And again, like, if we were here 10 years ago having this conversation about brucellosis, like, we'd have been told it's impossible to eradicate, but we did eradicate it. But we eradicated it with measures that were tough for people. So I think, like, we do have to review everything we're doing here.
The vaccination on the badgers, has there been any examination of that to see whether it's actually been effective or not?
Yeah.
Can you stand over that this is effective?
Yeah, there has been a research programme to look at that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Martin, but the conclusions were that it was no less effective than culling.
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, and part and parcel of what we're doing at the moment, as we roll out the vaccine, we're carrying out further research just to ensure that, you know, what we understood from the prior research is carrying through when we do it in the field.
And is there any vaccination of deer?
We haven't vaccinated deer. I mean, I suppose in the context of deer, we're aware from research that in Wicklow area in particular, there's a very common sharing of the bacterium between badgers, deer and cattle. We haven't seen the same correlation in other parts of the country where we've done the research. We haven't, I mean, the deer are wild. I mean, there's one thing, capturing badgers, capturing deer to vaccinate them would be challenging. It's something that probably is in our thinking in the context of something we might need to do.
Yeah. Okay.
We just on the deer, we did set up a deer task force chaired by Teddy Cashman. They came forward with a series of recommendations, and we're on the point of procuring a project manager with a view to doing something to manage the deer population.
Could I ask, is one of them for landowners to fence lands, particularly along main roads, even along the motorway, where deer are crisscrossing? Is that part of it? Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's time.
Because there's been some serious accidents in County
Yeah,
Laois.
that may be one of the recommendations. I'm not certain. I'm not certain.
I would ask that be looked at, because on the N77, which is the old, it's not a dual carriageway, you know, the far side of Abbeyleaks, there's been a lot of accidents there on two roads, one going to Balacolla, one going to Durrow, the old main Cork road, and on the road at Emo, going south of Monstreven, on the actual motorway itself, there's an issue there. I travel it every day, back and forward, but it's been huge, very bad accidents there. And look, I mean, whoever owns the land, whether it's Quilcher, whether it's Farmer, whoever, I mean, it just, you know, you have a responsibility. If the animals are on your land, there's responsibility. But it's a case of nobody being responsible. You know, this comes up at county council meetings the whole time. It just comes up. People have complained to me about it. One man's jeep, and it's lucky he was in a jeep. It was absolutely melogened with it. Hit a large deer. Nearly wrote it off completely. Had he been in the car, the possibility of serious injury, loss of life was really, you know. So I'd ask maybe that you'll come back to us on that to clarify, is that part of it? And if it's not, I would ask that it is. Okay, there's a road safety issue here along with animal welfare, because obviously you don't want to see deers slaughtered across the motorway either, you know. Yeah, right. So, Deputy O'Cosig.
Chair, it was just to pick up, I think you've covered most of the ground, Chairperson, but I did want to pick up on the vaccination programme of the badgers in particular. It sounds very much like we're going in the right direction. I'm delighted to hear that. I'm delighted to hear that we're underpinned by research in saying that it's no less effective. And of course, if you cull a badger, you create movement within the population because somebody else moves in, as it were. So there was that issue of it as well. So yeah, I suppose I wanted to ask how much money is going into that, whether it's a case of resources. I think it's pretty good. I mean, if you caught 9,000 badgers and we reckon the wild population is about 90,000, that means you're getting through 10% of what we imagine the badger population to be each year. How much money are we putting into that, and should we, you know, is that about the right level of resource, or do you think it could be something that is further resourced?
Sorry, Deputy, we're just saying that we have a figure for the wildlife element of the programme.
Well,
yeah, but we can certainly come back to you with a figure.
I was going to ask the flip side of that, and maybe people have the figures dug out, which was around deer management strategy. So am I right in what I heard there that we haven't implemented the deer management strategy yet, that we're still towards formulating that?
No, there is a strategy published, and one key element of it is the recruitment of a project manager to try and develop a programme for the management of populations. And we're at the point now where we've commenced, I think, a procurement exercise to try and recruit a project manager who will come forward with a plan for the control of deer.
Okay. Just in terms of deer management, I suppose the most straightforward is not maybe the word that I want to use, but the way that you manage a deer population, because of course they have no predators in an Irish context, is through culling. And I wanted to ask if you have figures of, is the Department of Agriculture who's responsible for that, for issuing licence, let's say, for deer hunters?
No.
Where does that lie? And
It's MPWS.
MPWS. And does the Department of Agriculture speak to the MPWS with regard? Surely that'll be a central plank of our deer management strategy.
Well, I mean, clearly, if we have an applicant who comes forward with a strategy, we'll have to talk to everybody involved and what kind of arrangements and administrative arrangements and licensing arrangements would be needed to manage populations. So that would have to be part of it, yeah.
Would you be aware of the number of deer culled? You haven't spoken to the MPWS to get your hands on those figures.
Yeah.
I mean, the deer strategy is brought forward in conjunction with in PWS. It's a joint departmental issue. So, I mean, they're in part and parcel of the strategy. In relation to numbers of deer killed, I just don't have data, but we can get that data back.
Is there any differentiation between Sika and red deer in that? Like the red deer being native, Sika being non-native, and probably the Sika, I'd be right in saying, much more problematic in terms of moving across the landscape?
My understanding is like the actual vast numbers in the Wicklow area are Sika, and that's where the most data we have from. We'll get to data in relation to the numbers of deer culled each year.
Let's say there's no specific instruction to people who would be involved in deer culling to cull one but not the other.
It's not, I mean, I suppose this is licensed by the individual.
I'd imagine the MPWS will have a view on that, and obviously they're part and parcel of this strategy.
So just to maybe to return to that wildlife element, if you've had the opportunity to pull the figures out.
Yeah, I have data here in relation to the spend on wildlife unit vaccination. For instance, in 2023, we spent in the region of 3.9 million on the the wildlife unit vaccination programme. In 2020, for instance, we spent 1.8 million.
But it's still, you know, it's less than 1/8 of the compensation programme. It represents very good value for money. If we can prevent paying out in compensation programme by investing more in our vaccination programme, that seems to me to represent good value for money.
Yeah, and we have to do both, Deputy, and it is departmental policy to increase the rate of vaccination, and it's a programme for government commitment, as you know.
Very good, thank you, Chair.
Deputy Murphy.
Back on a couple of points. I want to talk about the Animal Welfare Officer. And in your reply to us, you told us that the Animal Welfare Officer is responsible for assisting the business operation to ensure compliance with the relevant welfare legislation within the plant, and requires more extensive level of training than the other plant operatives dealing with and handling of live animals. The application to the Department for designation as the Animal Welfare Officer must include evidence of having passed a specific, the one we talked about with Chagast, a course, an examination, and must contain a signed written declaration that the applicant has committed no serious infringement of EU or national law in the protection of animals. Infringement doesn't mean conviction. Even a pending prosecution would be would fall within that category. Am I right on that?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, Deputy. It's a reasonable question, but an infringement of law, I don't know how that's been interpreted by the courts, but it generally means that you've broken the law, and to establish that somebody's broken the law, you generally need a conviction. But honestly, Deputy, I'm not sure. But clearly, it's something we're looking at.
Look, and can I ask you about the date the actual licence was that the last licence was issued for Shannonside?
It's my understanding it was 2015, but I don't have the specific date. But again, I'll come back to you with that.
Yeah, because one of the charges was dated from 2014, but it wasn't heard until November 2016. And what was on the charge was did neglect or be reckless regarding the health or welfare of 54 horses, contrary to Section 12B, offences against the Animal Act 2013. So, like, that was the pending. That was the pending.
Yeah, but that was one of the charges that was dismissed.
Yeah, and it was dismissed.
Not because the witness didn't turn up, but it was dismissed.
It was still alive.
Oh yes, correct.
Just in relation to the HRI, or in relation to the Mazars report, have you seen that report?
I've seen the draft.
And I think they told us that we were going to publish that as soon as it was received. We're presuming that is now a final report.
Well, I haven't seen a final report, but it will be published.
Okay.
I would say it's imminent.
Okay. And just in relation to, I mean, I know it's a policy issue in relation to the 80-20 in relation to, in relation to horses and dogs. I mean, the greyhounds are designated livestock, whether they race or not, and that's why they're in your department. I've always found that kind of difficult to figure out because a dog is a dog. But the overbreeding was obviously the subject of that previous Primetime Investigates, and the welfare aspect only requires the welfare, and there's a fund there for welfare, but it only requires to provide for the welfare of dogs that have raced. It doesn't require to cover the welfare of a breed that is deemed livestock. Where does that welfare aspect lie if it's outside of racing?
Well, like the owner of any animal, regardless of species, has obligations under the Animal Health and Welfare Act.
It's the ones that don't comply with that.
And if you don't comply with that, then that's an offence. So there are specific rules in relation to greyhounds, and I suppose one of the things that I mentioned last year is that we're trying to improve, or that RCE is trying to improve its traceability system. And we did have a discussion last year, Deputy, I think, about the fact that traceability system relates only to racing greyhounds, and I think it's there and it's being improved. But I'm open to the notion that maybe it should extend beyond racing greyhounds.
Oh,
so yeah.
I would hope that it will. There was when we looked at the viability of we had Bord na Gan, I think it was at the time, and there was actually only one track that was viable, two with the prize money being covered. Yeah. Of all the tracks, has that changed, or is that something you monitor?
I don't have the figures. I doubt if it's changed dramatically, Deputy. But I suppose it's a double-sided argument. On the one hand, you could say, well, the sector isn't viable without state support, and the state wants to support it. You know, so I know you're coming at it from a different perspective.
I know, I know I am, and I just, you know, when I think of what you could spend 18 or 20 million on, it wouldn't be my first choice, but that's a policy issue. In relation to the fish landing regime, I mean, obviously there was an issue there that at European level. Are we fully compliant now, and if so, what has brought us into compliance?
Well, there were a few issues, and I might defer to Sinead, and I'm glad I brought her now, but so there were a few issues. One is that there was an administrative inquiry into the controls we were applying at Piers, and we came forward, SFPA, Sea Fishery Protection Authority, which is operationally independent of the department, brought forward a control plan, which I think satisfied the European Union requirements. So, I mean, I think, as far as I'm aware, that control plan is in place and operating and is compliant. Sinead, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct. At the end of last year, the control plan had been approved by the Commission and it's in operation.
Okay. And how did that come to public attention? You might just remind us on that. Your attention, at least.
There was a Commission audit on the SFPA, and I mean, that's how it came to attention, and it resulted in an inquiry. So, yeah, that's how it came to our attention.
Okay, can I just ask you about protected disclosures? How many have you currently got, and what has it been like over the last 5 years?
Well, I should have anticipated that question because I think you asked me. I don't know the answer, but Deputy, I will come back to you with the number of protected. We do get protected disclosures from time to time, not a huge number, and we have a process in place for dealing with them, and I will come back to you with the numbers.
Okay, right.
Just, you okay, Deputy?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah.
that's pretty
Just ask, just in relation to the forestry scheme, it's one that we've raised in the past. There was an estimated provision of 100 million in 2022 for it as figure I have. There was an outturn of 74 million. That was the outturn, which shows that, you know, I suppose that kind of a headline shows that it's underperforming. The 100 million was to plant 8,000 hectares. Under the scheme, that would be about 18,000 acres. There was 3/4 of the money was spent. So was a corresponding number of trees planted in that year in terms of planting, you know, was there, you know, we'd say 6,000 hectares, 6,500 hectares planted in that year?
So, no, I would imagine, and Paul can confirm this, there were probably about 2,200 or 2,500 hectares planted. So that provision is made up of two elements. There are plants for granting that kind of offset the cost of planting for applicants, and then there are premia. So at that time, if you applied and planted trees, you got a premium for 15 years. So the bulk of the expenditure on that heading is for the premia, and a smaller amount is for planting. Now we've extended that premium for farmers only to 20 years. So we've a new forestry programme. We've dramatically increased the rates of grant by between 40 and 60%. The rates of premium, rather. We've a more attractive programme, but it's in its infancy.
And what's the plan for this year in terms of planting? Because we have, my understanding is that at the moment we have a plentiful supply, and will have for about 10 to 15 years for the timber industry, and particularly for construction. And we know that we're going to, I mean, all the signposts lead to more construction being done using timber, and that's great. More sustainable, better in terms of the climate, better, be great for Irish industry. The problem is that, and my information is that beyond that 10-15 year period, you're going to see a nosedive in terms of the quantities available, because we're not planting. How much was planted last year? What planting was done?
About again, it's about 2,500 hectares, 2,000.
That's only just over a quarter of what we need to be doing.
Yeah, but so a couple of things. First is every tree that's harvested has to be replanted. Every forest that's harvested has to be replanted. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, this is a voluntary land use for people. So we're dependent entirely on the applications people make. And the process has had its difficulties, as you know, the licensing process. I think we've improved that. We have a much better programme now. But there are environmental conditionalities that make it kind of difficult to plant in places we used to plant. So, for example, we used to plant on deep peat. Probably wasn't a great idea, but we're not allowed to do that anymore. So there are a kind of...
Because of the restriction on depth.
Yeah,
depth of
exactly, and probably that led to a net emission, which wasn't the objective of having a forestry programme. So the environmental conditionality is substantial, but we have a licensing system now which will deliver a licence to a new applicant between 6 months if an appropriate assessment for environmental purposes isn't required, or within 9 months. And the returns from the premia are really dramatically improved. But there's a bit of a culture shift required for farmers to decide they're going to put part of their land into trees in perpetuity.
I get that.
You'll understand that, like, you know. So it's a big challenge.
Yes.
But all of the trees we're harvesting, they all have to be replanted. So all we're talking about there is the additional planting, and 2,500 hectares. It's not close to our target. That's probably about 3.5 million trees.
The 2,500 is the additional amount. New
planting. So if you go to the beginning of the state, we probably had 1% forestry. Now we've about 11% forestry. We're trying to get it up.
We managed to burn an awful lot of it in the previous couple of few hundred years.
Well,
all those big houses with chimneys, with 20 and 25 chimneys on them.
Well, I'll let you do the historical analysis. I mightn't be allowed to say that.
And a fellow with a full-time job going around stoking them.
Yeah.
But anyway, you can see that, which is when you look at them, including around this city, when you look at the number of chimneys on buildings, the older buildings. Just in relation to the fees, right? There's a question I wanted to ask you in relation to the cost of planting per hectare. There's been, a 10 or 11-fold increase in terms of the cost to the farmer, right? What can be done about that? Because what I'm being told is that by the time you actually get the plant to go through the process, it's there's 10 11% or 10 or 11 times fold jump in the costs of actually the admin costs and the preparation and all of that. Can anything be done about that? Because that would appear to be a barrier.
Well, all I can say, Deputy, and again, Paul Savage will come in with better detail than I have, is that the planting grants, I think they've been doubled in the last programme, or close to doubled, and the premium are hugely attractive. And we think the grants are reasonably reflective of the costs associated with it on the basis of the analysis we've done. But Paul, if I'm wrong about any of that, will you correct me, please?
What we'd ask Mr. Savage is to take up with the grants. Can you see signs of that? Is the graph going upwards in terms of the take-up and the scale? Or is it still going downwards?
Yeah, is the graph going upwards? Well, I think you probably have to take account of the fact that the new programme now is just in place effectively, and we put in place new arrangements on foot of the approval of the programme by the Commission last year. Sorry?
How long is it in place?
New programme since last September, launched last September, okay? And we've had to incorporate into our systems the means to deal with all the conditionality and the criteria that the Commission imposed upon us in terms of approving the programme. And as Secretary General mentioned earlier, that relates to things like sensitive areas, deep peats, and criteria that we have to apply in a number of other areas to assess whether a plantation is allowed in a particular place. So we've had a kind of a transition over the last number of months from the instigation of the new programme to try and shift that culture, as you mentioned. We're making it very attractive in terms of the increase in the rates. And
but
the culture piece...
Mr. Savage, has the decrease stopped? Have you halted the decrease, or is it still decreasing?
In terms of the rate of planting?
Yeah, the number of applications and the scale of them.
The number of applications is slower than we would like at the moment. It's coming in on the afforestation side at about 14 per week.
In comparison, we'll say to 3 or 4 years ago, is it still going downwards?
No, it's starting to pick up now compared to 3 or 4 years ago.
And in terms of the scale of those applications, the number of hectares, is that increasing? Because it was, you will know that there was a lot of the grants that were given were for very small parcels of land. They may have been for 5 or 10 acres or whatever. Yeah. Are they, and that's good, that happened. But is the scale of them, are you getting ones that say, do they tend to be of a larger scale now?
I don't know the
figures. Are we planting the trees? That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, I don't.
For the money we're putting in.
I don't have the figures to hand in terms of the kind of the typical number of trees that will be, or the scale of the plantation. I don't think there's much. I think it's pretty consistent in terms of individual applications with the scale of the applications we would have received in the past. Our issue is really about getting the numbers up. The numbers of applications need to increase, and that's really the key issue.
The size of the applications, the size of of what they're being applied for does make a difference.
Oh, no, the size.
Whether somebody's applying for 2 hectares or for 22 hectares, that's my point.
Yeah. Could I make a point, Chairman, if you don't mind? So, like, landowners, we need to get landowners to plant trees. Generally, they're farmers. And it is this big cultural shift. So I accept exactly the point you're making, but what we're giving people now are a number of choices. So they can do agroforestry, and they can keep grazing their animals under the trees. We have a small planting scheme where you don't need a licence, but you can plant a hectare of trees, or 2 hectares if they're along a river bank. So we have various options for people, and like those small things won't result in a big bang in terms of tree numbers the way you're talking about. But they do get farmers used to the idea that, yeah, we can do this, we can earn a living from it, and it's a toehold into the sector. And remember, this is a 30-year investment. So we're right at the start of a programme where we're asking people to set a chunk of land aside in perpetuity. But I think the messaging has to be, this is not instead of farming. This can be a valuable part of your farm enterprise.
Yes.
So we have to do all of those things.
I would have been a proponent of that agroforestry. But with the agroforestry, has that started to take, I'm trying to get a sense of where this is at. Has that started taking off now? Are you getting applications for that, for agroforestry, where you will have some trees and you will have some farming? in the same fields?
Yeah, I think so far we're seeing a lot of interest in the agroforestry. It hasn't come true in terms of actual figures
Applications?
yet. Yeah, I mean,
Are you getting applications for it?
We are getting applications, but it hasn't come
good.
through in significant numbers.
But not significant, okay.
But we are in the early stages, I think, of promoting and increasing the awareness of what's there in terms of agroforestry, because we have expanded the type of agroforestry systems that are capable of being supported. So we were involved in silvicultural systems, and we're expanding that out into other areas as well. And obviously the grant rates have gone up compared to
Other
last time.
types of trees?
In terms of trees, yeah.
Okay.
And there's a lot more flexibility also in terms of agroforestry now, in terms of the
Which can you plant without a
configurations.
licence? Much can you plant without a licence? What Mr.
well,
Gleeson referred to.
At the moment, without a licence, it's under the native tree area scheme. You can plant up to 2 hectares. 1
Up to
hectare.
2 hectares, okay.
1 hectare and plus
4.5
1
acres
hectare
without-
for a riparian
right.
margin, yeah.
But
Yeah.
that has to be native trees.
Yes, that's native
Yeah,
trees.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. That's fine. No, it's just, the money's gone in, it's underperforming, there's been huge difficulty in it. And last question on this, just in regard to the licences, because I know I raised it with department officials, and I said there's not many TDs in the house, and that's been raised at some time. There were huge problems with that, right? And there's an urgency on addressing this. What's the timeline now, the average timeline for those to be processed now, applications for felon licences? So that's a huge problem. That was a huge problem in my area.
Yeah, I'd like to take that.
So, I mean, the commitment, deputies, and we'll meet this, is if you're a new applicant and you don't need an appropriate assessment for environmental purposes, you get a licence within 6 months. And if you do need an appropriate assessment, you get a licence in 9 months. And there's really no way to abbreviate those processes, because before you start, you have to do two 30-day public consultations, for example.
No, I get that.
But
But the felon licence in particular, you know, what's the average timeline on those now?
I'm
Because
fairly
they go to Wexford.
Yeah, well, lots of applications come in essentially are processed in Wexford and are distributed around the country then as well. But I think on the felling side, I don't have the number off the top of my head in terms of,
What kind of timeline are we talking about?
well, you're talking...
Because we're taking 3 years.
Yeah, no, in an overall sense, well, across the board, we've seen the amount of waiting time coming down. We're down now, I think, certainly on the afforestation side to around 11, 12 months from what was previously greater than 24 months. And on the felling side, I think it's less than 11 months. It's closer now to the 6 and 9 month turnaround that Secretary mentioned.
It's just important that further work is done on that, you know, maybe a 6 month or something like that, that you try and put a target on it.
Yeah, and I would add that we have committed to those targets in the Farmers' Charter negotiations that were finished recently. So we are saying, as was mentioned, that we'll turn those licence applications around in 6 months where there's no need for an environmental assessment, and 9 months where there is. And we are making changes to the structures internally in terms of the integration of our forestry inspectors and ecology resources to try and make sure that those licences are being processed more quickly.
Thank you.
Two quick questions.
Go ahead.
If that's okay. We obviously don't have an equine abattoir now, and you haven't, there's been no live exports to date since the licence was revoked. When does that begin becoming a problem? Is it immediate, or will it be something that we'd see in the winter? Or, you know, what are the strategies to deal with this?
Yeah, well, first of all, people have obligations to the animals they own.
I understand that,
So, and there are lawful ways to dispose of animals or to export of animals. It's not that we've stopped exporting animals. We haven't stopped the export of animals. It's possible to do that, I think. But there was a second strand to the question now that I've...
When will it become a problem?
Oh, yeah. Well, it'll only become a problem if people behave unlawfully. You know, there are ways to do this, but we have had a number of expressions of interest in establishing an abattoir, and we're considering those. But there's a big difference between expressing interest and following through. And anybody who's approached us, we're being as helpful as we can.
Okay.
And we've had 3 or 4 approaches.
And can I just, my final question is, the animal welfare officer in the case of Shannonside, is that the owner's son? Yes, and he was 16 when he was the animal welfare officer to begin with.
Just be careful around that.
Yeah, and I've seen the questions. We got press queries. I don't know the answer to that.
He is a family member, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, just, Mr. Gleeson, you wanted to correct the record, just something that you said earlier on in relation to...
I think I said in relation to the Shannonside current investigation that it was about animal welfare and identification issues. In fact, it's just about the identification issues and traceability.
Mr. Martin, to let you
Thanks.
clarify that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. So, just I want to thank the witnesses and the staff of the Department of Agriculture, Food, Marine and the Department of Public Expenditure of National Development Plan Delivery and Reform for the work of preparing for today's meeting. I also want to thank the Controller and Auditor General and the Auditor General and indeed the staff for assisting the committee as well for today's meeting. Is to agree to seek any follow-up information and to carry out any agreed actions arising from the meeting. I think that is agreed. It's also agreed that we note and publish the opening statements and briefings provided for today's meeting. I think that is agreed. So I'm going to suspend the meeting of the Public Accounts Committee until 1:30 when we will resume in public session to address correspondence and any other business of the committee. So for a minimum, I'll go.
Thank you. Thanks.